My fellow Westorians, I'm Aziz. With me is Ashea. This is Valar Rereadis. As we take on A Feast for Crows, near the end now, Valar Rereadis seeks to entertain while preparing you for the winds of winter. Many of the new plot lines and locations launched in this book are not yet resolved, taking us to our greatest heights of mystery yet. For the remainder of the Valar Rereadis journey, we'll be looking ahead, if not more, as much as we've been looking back. But the core message remains true.
The best books are those that hold up to repeated rereading. From George R. R. Martin himself.
That's right. The man knows what he's talking about. If you're watching live, you can feel free to ask live questions. You can also feel free to send questions and comments ahead of time by joining the discussion on one of our social media platforms. Facebook, Flick, Discord, and Slack. Yeah, we own Facebook, Flick, Discord, and Slack. Yes, that's what we've been doing with our downtime. Also, be sure to check out the Isle of Faces podcast. That's Joe Buckley's show. His Valar Rereadis episodes are called Scraps and Scrolls over there, and they're lined up with us right in tandem. Each time we do a set of chapters, he does the same group. Nina Friel's thoughts are in every episode of Valar Rereadis as well. You can check out more of her thoughts on goodqueenally.tumblr.com. That's with one L. You can join us on Patreon if you want to provide financial support to our show. That's how you do that. Go over to patreon.com/history of Westeros. There you'll find that we offer benefits, so it's not just support and nothing in return. You get access to bonus episodes, our scripts, occasionally things like voting and polls, things like that. But if you want a simpler version of way to support, something you can kind of fire and forget, minimal interaction, all stuff like that, and don't have to worry about anything, you can join us on Anchor. And you don't have to have an Anchor account for that. That's through Spotify. It just shows up as part of your Spotify bill. Very simple, very straightforward. You can find the link in the podcast description if that is what interests you. Big news, Michael Klarfeld has finished his Reach map. It's in the style of these two behind me. If you're watching the video version, you can see, or if you're listening, hopefully you've seen versions of Michael's maps in other places. Certainly you can check out claridox.de for the full slate. And also he's partnered up with our friend Chuck over at phantomaniacs.com, so you can buy his maps on a variety of things like cups and poster forms, just lots of different ways that you can get a hold of Michael's art.
Yeah, and the new map is gorgeous. He is, of course, also working on future projects. So if you want to submit yourself as a model, you can post in our History of Westeros group, and we'll direct you to Michael's Facebook group for that. He particularly needs dudes right now, but we want everyone to submit.
Yeah, that's because we have lots of, there's a lot of guys, I guess, are maybe a little shy about
submitting their face
to be a model.
Yeah, whereas there's a lot of female submissions.
Yeah, lots of great ones, and a lot of them are going to get used. That's one of the fun things, too, is you might end up with your face on one of these maps. Whenever I look at one of these maps, I get to see a whole bunch of people I know, a bunch of friends. You can see right here. Look, there I am with Sean. All right, so let's get to it. Only 8 chapters left in the book. These are the first 4 of that final 8, and the last 4 will be next week. We start with Jaime 6, My Parlay with Blackfish, a.k.a. the Great Bluff of Riverrun.
Then Cersei 9, The Gang Throws a Moon Tea Party, a.k.a. Orton, Who's a Hand?
The Princess in the Tower, the one with vengeance, justice, fire and blood, a.k.a. the Tower of Joyless.
And finally, Alayne 2, Sweetsleep for Sweetrobin, a.k.a. the gang meets Randa Royce.
So I had chosen to call the Jaime 6 one the Brotherhood Infiltrates Riverrun, which kind of happens at the end of the chapter when Thomas Evans shows up to sing for Edmure. But really, that's more Jaime 7 when we see it happen. So I changed the title a little bit back to what I called it Great Bluff of River, and then I changed it to Brotherhood Infiltrates Riverrun. Then I changed it back to this. So anyway, just in case you're confused by my inconsistent names on that chapter. Anyway, as the Storm of Swords ended so many arcs, it's the functional purpose of a Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons to kick off a lot of new plots, including locations, which we have been seeing all throughout this book. Many of these things we've known or felt were coming. Others were a bit of a surprise. And as we reach the end of A Feast for Crows, we're going to see quite a lot more of that happening. Each of these chapters has a lot of resolution and a lot of setup, for the most part. For the bigger POVs, it's like a 2-chapter process, as we have Cersei and Jaime's second to last chapters today. They are the 2 biggest POVs in the book, so it makes sense that their ending is a little more stretched out. Lots more things to cover with them. Cersei makes a final series of moves this week before her mistake come back to haunt her next week, and Jaime opens Riverrun without bloodshed, but loses the Blackfish and doesn't realize he's opened the doors to the Brotherhood at the same time throughout these 2 chapters. Sansa doesn't need 2 chapters to set up the next phase while finishing her arc in this book with Alayne too, but she does have a nice 69-minute chapter, which is the second longest chapter in all of A Song of Ice and Fire so far. While Arianne's early plan to crown Myrcella is seemingly buried for good, her father reveals at long last the plans he's been working on behind the scenes. For the most part, it's set up for the Winds of Winter, though, not A Dance with Dragons. I think a lot of y'all realize that, but it is a little unusual structurally for a series to do this. Hotah does have a chapter with Arianne, but Arianne herself doesn't have any chapters in A Dance with Dragons, nor does Sansa. Jaime just has one, and it links him to Brienne again, but she herself also has none, while Cersei has 2. So mostly, of course, when we go to A Dance with Dragons, it's an entirely different set of characters, although there is, as we've just seen, a little bit more to some of these storylines. With so many characters with roles to play, well, some are forced by threats of violence, some forced by actual violence, others from necessity or expedience or ambition. That seems to be a strong theme today. People not being themselves, having to perform. And I don't mean perform, obviously, in the sense of in a play or as an actor. I mean playing a role to get a goal accomplished or because they have to. For Cersei, this is a semi-regular feature, but it's quite intense in this chapter with the Blue Bard and Pycelle suffering for it this time. Maester Coleman is forced to violate his oaths of service in similar fashion to his compatriot in King's Landing, meaning fellow Maester. And Jaime, meanwhile, tries to be Tywin, trying and failing with Blackfish and his war council before somewhat succeeding with Edmure and Ryman Frey. A consistent feature of his chapter is his inner monologue speaking in opposition to the words that come out of his mouth. So he's saying one thing, but thinking another. A pretty clear sign that he's playing a role. Arianne spends large amounts of time considering how to face her father. She knows it's coming. She's got lots of time to think about it. And she thinks about it strategically. How she's going to present herself physically, like what she's going to wear, what kind of demeanor to present, as well as the word choice and things like that. While she agonizes over which role to play, and then the roles that her father has asked her to play in the past, she's finally told that while her father was planning a secret new role for her as Queen of Westeros, well, that's done now, and her role is to be almost exactly what she was scheming to be again, the Princess of Dorne. Littlefinger, of course, is an expert at playing roles and in playing to his audience, playing the role that needs to be played, all that. He's really good at it. We've been seeing him do it since we first met him. As obvious as it is to us readers that he does this and that he's dangerous, we're reminded that his role playing has concealed how dangerous he is to a lot of characters in world. Like Cersei's like, yeah, we should just bring him back to be Master of Coin. They don't understand how dangerous he is. He has very effectively played his role to minimize how many people see him as a threat. Sansa is all throughout this book giving us our closest look at him yet, confirming how dangerous he really is. And this is going to be a real test for her, though, now. While she's been behind the scenes with servants for the most part, she did serve wine and offer courtesies in one scene, but now she has to be Alayne in casual situations as well, around much more scrutinizing eyes. So she's really got to play her role as Alayne even more than she has before. Singers, though not songs, show up a bit importantly here, though the plot has mostly moved past him, past the point of, or part of the point of Miranda Royce is to poke at parts of Alayne that are meant to be kept secret, primarily her name and heritage, of course, but she brings up Marillion, and that reminds us of another thing that Sansa's keeping secret, Lysa's murder being a lie as well. Marillion was tortured into a false confession. Similarly, Cersei has Qyburn torture a singer into a false confession, while again, Jaime's chapter ends with Edmure feeling menaced by Tom O'Sevens threatening to play the Reigns of Castamere. Ironically, Tom is most likely an ally to Edmure, or at least to a lot of Edmure's allies, so allies of his allies, but Tom has a role to play. So let's go to Jaime 6, my parlay with Blackfish, aka the Great Bluff of Riverrun. This chapter is strong in that it has quite a lot to laugh at, while also being incredibly subtle and doing quite a lot to set up future plots, which of course is the main function of these end of book chapters. The structure of this one is pretty straightforward. There's the parlay, the war council, and then the bluff or semi-bluff to Edmure that opens the gates. Though technically we don't see the gates open until Jaime 7. The War Council is where most of the setup for that last chapter, plus the Winds of Winter and beyond, lies, while various excellent conversations happen as well. The dialogue in this chapter is near the top of the list for this book, especially, but certainly not limited to humor. A lot of dark humor, though, isn't it? Some of it's laughing at just the ridiculousness of something that really, if it were real, wouldn't be that funny. In this, George R. Martin is breaking a trope again. This chapter appears to be heading in the direction of a climactic bloody assault, a climax of the sort that is not unexpected at the end of a book. Instead, the chapter breaks expectations with a resolution that only seems peaceful on the outside. Jaime thinks he's avoided a massacre when he convinces Edmure to open the gates. In reality, he's probably only delaying the paying of that butcher's bill, and that delay might cause some interest to be tacked onto that debt. And, well, Lannisters are always supposed to pay their debts, but gold won't cut it this time.
The brooch that fastened Sir Brynden Tully's cloak was a blackfish, wrought in jet and gold. You weren't expecting me to be so ready right there.
You were more ready. Yeah, exactly. You were so ready that I wasn't ready. And I said gold won't cut it this time, and here he is with jet and gold. But paired with black, I think that's kind of an interesting symbol. You have things have gone too far. The red wedding must be repaid in blood. But before that can happen, we see the smaller scale fallout, the death of trust. Gold has been blackened as a power here. Clothing is so important in the opening of this chapter, Nina says. The blackfish wearing his blackfish while riding a horse in Tully colors. It's a sign that in Brendan's mind, at least, he can be both Blackfish and Tully, the one who rejected Hoster's dynastic ambitions for him while still protecting the Tully castle. Jaime riding honor with Kingsguard barding, but wearing red, meaning Lannister cloak. He thinks he can be both Lannister and Kingsguard, though in this chapter, he isn't much of a Kingsguard. He acts like a Lannister. It doesn't help Jaime's visual point either that he's come dressed in crimson. He may say he wants to avoid bloodshed, but he's wearing lots of red. And of course, Blackfish doesn't believe him anyway. He openly refuses any kind of peace deal, or basically any kind of deal at all. Anything that hinges on Jaime's word, he's not going to go by. He's not going to trust. This is a big deal. In Westerosi noble society, it is fairly typical that a sworn word is upheld. A knight or lord or lady or king or queen who swore openly to something could be expected to uphold it. After all, think about what happened with Sir Cleos here at Riverrun. He was allowed to leave on the condition that he come back and resume his captivity, which he did. Yeah, well, he died, but he was planning on doing it. So that's a lot of trust for an enemy. Here, Blackfish gives not an inch of it, and Jaime can't really blame him for it. He's like, yeah, I get why you don't trust me. This is the legacy of, again, Tywin's legacy, Walder Frey's legacy. This is how they've moved the window of society. This tradition of valuing honor and valuing trusting the word of sworn people. It's gone, at least in this situation. Honor is gone. I don't mean his horse. His horse is right there. A sworn word was as good as gold. Ironically, for the most golden of houses, it's not true. There's no blood shed in this chapter, but there are blood stains, and that's at the heart of this. We know that Jaime met Brynden when he was young, and he idolized him. A lot of young boys did. Blackfish was and still is famous. I wonder if he was wearing that same brooch back then. I mean, he's not a very flashy guy. We don't see any other ornamentation. It might be the only piece of jewelry he wears. Maybe he's got some ring or something, but I kind of doubt it. It's not like he was ever married or anything. So this is quite possibly the only piece of jewelry he has. He wouldn't go out buying more pieces of jewelry. So it's entirely possible he's had the same brooch for 40 some years or whatever, 30 years, and Jaime's remembering it. It might be like a subconscious memory the first time he met the man. He's still a bit starstruck, even though he's in a position where he has to speak to him as an equal, if not an authority. But look at how he takes a long time to decide what to wear. And I think Blackfish knows this. Not that Jaime took a while deciding what to wear, but that he's starstruck. Blackfish knows he's famous. He's also insightful and perceptive. And he probably remembers Jaime being starstruck with him when he was a kid, and also has experienced that with lots of other people. Multiple times in this conversation, Blackfish kind of overmatches Jaime without Jaime fully even realizing it. It's like being beaten by a strategy you're not even aware of. And that is an overwhelming factor here, generally speaking, with this conversation. I often can't help myself when it comes to seeing things in terms of poker metaphor. And this one, I'm going to go all in on that, because the chapter is full of parallels that look like the kind of strategies employed at a poker table. Bluffing, calling bluffs, even an explanation of proper bluffing strategy comes in this one. Trash talk, getting people off their game by tilting them, meaning getting someone to make intellectual decisions using the emotional part of their brain. So that's what's happening here. It looks like Blackfish was trying to get Jaime off of his game a little bit, lose some emotional control, etc. And George R. R. Martin knows this very well. I don't think it's through poker, but it is through chess. George played competitive chess in college, and he wrote a short story called Unsound Variations in 1982. It's in Dream Songs 1 or 2, I forget which. Chess is the centerpiece of that story, and from the way he writes about it, it's clear he has a deep understanding of the game. If I hadn't already known that he had played chess competitively in college, I would have suspected it from reading that story. It's full of jargon and technical terms. Some of it goes over my head, but other parts are really familiar to the same type of strategic discussions and jargon that happens in poker discussions. So Jaime thinks of how, with his hand, and I mean his real hand, not a hand of cards, that they could have had a sweet fight. But this conversation reads like a duel. Point, counterpoint, thrust, parry. I'm not sure how a real fight would have gone between them, but the result is clear enough. In this case, Jaime got masterfully outplayed by Blackfish. And that's funny, and again, because normally one of the most common terms for someone who's bad at poker is a fish. So Jaime got beat by a fish. He lost all his chips to this fish and doesn't even realize how. He rides away from their encounter bewildered and isn't quite sure how it could have gone different. He's like, man, what could I have done differently? That is often the feel that you might have if you're playing a game against someone that's way better than you. You're like, man, is there anything I could have done to have a different result there? And no, not really. You are going to get beaten because the other person is superior to you. That's what happens when a confident and talented but inexperienced player goes up against a confident and talented and very experienced player. Blackfish is way more experienced in everything that Jaime is. Almost everything. You know, Jaime's got more experience with, I don't know, incest. Being a Lannister, I don't know. With a complex enough game, though, you can lose without understanding what strategy your opponent used to beat you. It's harder to conceal the strategies in games that are a little simpler, even when simple games can still be a challenge when you're playing against someone a lot better than you. So in life, as in poker, if you have a reputation, people will treat you accordingly. It's very straightforward, right? If you're a liar and people know you're a liar, they won't believe you as easily as if you're someone who has a reputation for telling the truth. If you're aggressive, well, people might trap you. They may play off your aggressiveness. Blackfish already defeated Jaime just like this back in the Whispering Wood in Book 1. He knew Jaime would take the bait, fall into their trap. He literally used a betting metaphor. He's like, I swear I'd stake my life on it, something like that. He had a reputation for being aggressive, Jaime did. He was trying really hard to win every battle rather than focusing on the big picture, the campaign. Again, that's true in poker. It's absolutely true to listen to that song. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Folding doesn't mean losing. It means waiting for a better chance. If you have a predictable style of play in any game, an expert will exploit that. Non-expert strategy will not defeat an expert, almost always. There's always an exception. There's Mr. Magoo style luck where you fail upwards, things like that. Back in the Whispering Wood, Jaime should have known that a skilled man like Blackfish would be taking into account Jaime's reputation. When you have two experts, they consider, okay, he knows how I play, so I got to adjust to how he knows how I play. It's called leveling, where one guy's like, okay, he knows that I know, so I know that he knows, and he knows that I know. And how many times back and forth does that go? But Jaime doesn't even reach level 1. He's like, I'm going for it. I'm going to get him. And Blackfish thinks, okay, this is a hyper-aggressive guy. We're going to trap him. A smart, aggressive player in poker is wary of being trapped because they know people will play off their reputation. But Jaime is just, go right for it. But we can see that he's changed, right? At the start of this journey back to the Riverlands, Jaime's learned to be careful. He's super cautious regarding his camp, sending out scouts. He's like, I'm never going to get trapped like that again. He learned his lesson. A lesson. There's plenty more lessons to learn, but he learned that one. So if you're known to be a player who bluffs a lot, similar to lying, your bluffs have less credibility. But if you're a person who rarely or never bluffs and people know that about you, well, when you make a big bet, they're like, he's probably got a big hand. That enables you to occasionally make a bluff when you don't have a big hand because people trust your actions. You have believability. So Jaime tries to convince Blackfish that his position, i.e. his hand, is stronger than it really is. The besiegers have issues with food. Jaime tries to bluff that they don't. But this is a bad bluff. Blackfish knows better. He knows war. He knows logistics. This is his home territory. He actually gives Jaime the classic, if you say so. To that one, it's like, yeah, nice try, dude. I'm going to swat that argument right down. All Jaime has done with that lie, with that bad bluff, is to indicate that maybe he's not a very good liar. So really all he's done is, if he were really careful or really clever, he could have set Blackfish up to say, okay, I'm going to make him think I'm not a good liar, and then I'm going to tell a really good lie. But that's not what happens. Instead, it's the Blackfish who tells a really great lie.
I will permit you to take the black. Ned Stark's bastard is the Lord Commander on the wall.
The Blackfish narrowed his eyes. Did your father arrange for that as well? Catelyn never trusted the boy, as I recall, no more than she ever trusted Theon Greyjoy. It would seem she was right about them both. No, sir, I think not. So, next up in Cersei's chapter, Osney Kettleblack will remind her that the best lies have a grain of truth to them, as a way to get her to sleep with him so he can be telling the truth when he tells the High Sparrow that he slept with Queen Marjorie. So one queen, yeah. So what Brendan here says is true. Technically, Catelyn did mistrust Jon Snow. We all know that for certain. But Blackfish doesn't say that he shares that opinion. He says Catelyn had that idea, and he knows that Robb trusted Jon. It's true that Blackfish was not there for the signing of Robb's will, so it's possible he doesn't know Jon was named heir. Though personally, I suspect Robb discussed it with him before signing it. Maybe he didn't get confirmation, but it's extremely unlikely to me that Robb and Blackfish, given how much they worked together, Jon never came up. And Robb likes Jon. So I think this was a bluff. I think Blackfish actually has a at least neutral opinion of Jon, if not a positive one, because of Robb, and thus is just pretending to go with Catelyn's opinion to avoid having to address Jaime's point, to parry his argument. Now, if Jaime knew Robb and Jon were tight, he might have been able to sniff out that lie and say, well, Catelyn thinks that. Well, what did Robb think of what did your king think of Jon Snow? And Jaime could have known this. He was at Winterfell, but he either didn't pick up on it or never thought to consider it. He didn't think at all about Robb's opinion of Jon. That's a point of interest that didn't occur to him. It didn't occur to him that there could be a lie here, right? He buys it because women disliking their husbands' bastards is a common truth, and he doesn't think to go any farther with that. So it's pretty masterful assuming I'm right here, there's a chance that, no, Blackfish really is just taking Cat's word on Jon Snow. But I'm strongly suspect that's not the case. Anyway, Jaime's image is such that Brendan doesn't believe him on the issue of Jane Westerling either.
The girl has been pardoned. No harm will come to her. You have my word on that.
Your word of honor?
Sir Brendan raised an eyebrow.
Do you even know what honor is?
A horse? I will swear any oath that you require.
This one is true, as we end up seeing. I mean, he does at least intend not to harm Jane. We don't know that no harm will come to her, but we know that he doesn't intend any harm to her. So,
Man, it'll be messed up if something happens to Jane. Just because, messed up for her, but also poor Jaime. Nothing looks good for him.
Yeah, he's like, I was sincere, but it looks like I did. Damn it. So it's a pretty big deal when your boyhood idol tells you, you always disappoint, Kingslayer. That stings. I mean, that's going to sting, even though they're on opposite sides, when your boyhood idol says that to you. And when your boyhood idol knows you're his boyhood idol, he knows he can hurt you with words. This is the kind of thing he'd say. So again, I think this is part playing a role here. Blackfish knew what to say, knew where to stick the knife, knew how to hurt Jaime. And as he said at the end, he was like, I didn't even really need to be here. I was just gonna, I just wanted to have a chat because it's boring to be in a siege. Now, Jaime managed to keep his cool throughout several other insults. Ironically, he only seems to lose it at an insult that perhaps wasn't even made.
His face darkened. Are you calling me a coward?
No, I'm calling you a cripple.
The Blackfish nodded at Jaime's golden hand.
We both know you cannot fight with that. So to me, this is mild evidence that he's starstruck again. Blackfish is blunt, mocks Jaime for true things. He doesn't need to dub a person a coward who's not one. It's also just not true. Everybody knows Jaime's not a coward. Of all things, that's not one of the, of all criticisms of Jaime, that's not really one that lands. So he'll tell you what he thinks to your face, and it'll be true, coming from Blackfish. But he might, like any craft master, like any craft, but he might, like any master of scouts and ambushes, know how his words will be mistaken. In other words, he's good at leading Jaime into traps, even if Jaime isn't good at avoiding them. And with that going so badly for him, he sets off to begin the War Council, which also doesn't go so well. As he himself notes, it not only doesn't go very well, it doesn't go like how it would go for his father. And he does set out to try that angle at first. He's thinking, okay, well, what my father did was to let other people speak first and then listen. But they end up just arguing bitterly, which he's like, well, this wouldn't happen at my father's council, would it? Well, maybe not. But regardless, we can see where things lie with regards to respect and attitude of the Lannisters and the Freys. By the way, different lords handle themselves. It's definitely not the world under Tywin anymore. That's super clear. It hardly needs to be said. Immediately, the Freys disrespect themselves when Ryman doesn't show up because he drank too much. I mean, what a reason to not be there. And not long after a variety of bad ideas, we get one of the best in-your-face style lines of the entire series.
Edwin bristled.
If my Lord of Piper means to imply...
I don't imply, Frey. I say what I mean straight out like an honest man. But what would you know of the ways of honest men? You're a treacherous, lying weasel, like all your kin.
Yeah. Open anger and insults at the Freys, despite their position of power, including hostages, is quite a strong indicator of where things lie. Usually, hostages and this sort of having a knife at your throat means you have to play nice, but that is the opposite of what's happening. They're like, even though you have my son, even though you have the edge in power here, we're still just going to call you things to your face. We're still going to, not cooperate, things like that. Contrast this to the welcome the Freys are receiving up north, where Wyman Manderley delivered his own A-grade insult of the Freys. If these books were being read, if we were doing a different chapter order, doing a modified chapter order, those two would probably go together. But Lord Wyman said nothing about the Boltons in open court. Notice that, because Roose would do more than take insult. Perhaps this is more like a Tywin situation. You don't insult someone that you know will respond to insults with extreme violence, not just violence, but extreme violence. So without Tywin there, this is perhaps a big part of why people are a little freer with their tongues. And Jaime, despite his wishes to be, is no Tywin. And again, Blackfish knows this. Blackfish knows Jaime's not Tywin. But Edmure does not know Blackfish is that Jaime is not Tywin. And Jaime himself doesn't realize it, which helps him sort of play the role that he is. It's like his own ignorance at not actually being like his father helps him play the role more confidently. Yeah, ignorance is bliss. Ignorance can be confidence too. So as badly as Jaime was outplayed by Blackfish in their one-on-one match, Jaime makes up for it a bit by succeeding with some of the same tactics against Edmure that failed against Brendan, only with, well, more emphasis. And Edmure is not nearly the player his uncle is. That also probably doesn't need to be said, but yeah, Blackfish better at poker than Edmure. Jaime runs the same bluff regarding attacking the castle, but adds more to the lie. He embellishes more. He describes more what will happen afterwards. He says he'll kill everyone inside. He'll tear down the walls. He'll torch the godswood. Then he really channels his father when he says he'll divert the Tumblestone River over the ruins. Obviously, this is very similar to what Tywin did to the Castamere to the Rains. He flooded House Rain with the lake, the Castamere Lake. So that's extremely similar, except for that I do think that, well, Tywin didn't bluff. He didn't say, I'm going to do this. He just did it. It was pretty much his intention from the start. He wasn't trying to negotiate a surrender. He was trying to destroy this house. That was his goal. So that right there is very different situation. Even if you think Jaime would have gone through with this, I just don't think he was going to go through with all of this. Maybe he's not lying about the trebuchet via the child on the trebuchet. And in fact, by bringing up killing children, he does bring up his father, because everyone knows Tywin was willing to kill children. So that's a tough threat to back down from, sitting there in your bathtub like Edmure was, when the son of a child killer is telling you that he's going to kill your child. It's hard to call that bluff. But even though I do think it's a bluff, at least, like I said, in part, I really don't think he was going to tear down, tear down all the walls. I really don't think he has that authority. I mean, he could come back and be like, yeah, I had to destroy the whole castle. What's Cersei going to do? Execute him? No, he could get away with it, but he really doesn't want to do that. He thinks he's just more confident that his story's going to work. And yeah, he realizes who his opponent is this time. Made a better play. So Jaime didn't explain bluffing completely. And it's funny because he just said to Ryman, don't make a threat that you can't carry out. So here I am saying that he's doing the exact thing he said not to do. Is that really what's happening? Did Jaime just tell Ryman Frey, don't make a threat you can't carry out, and then make a threat he wasn't going to carry out himself? Well, let's unpack this a little more. Jaime didn't explain it entirely. It's true that you shouldn't risk bluffing if it's too easy for your opponent to call. The thing is about risk here. That's what happened. Ryman threatened to hang Edmure, and Blackfish called that bluff. He said, well, he's doomed anyway. Go ahead. It doesn't move the needle at all. So Ryman risked looking like a fool. Well, he did look like a fool. He risked it beforehand, and the risk came through because he didn't back up his threats, and he gained nothing from the situation. He did it because he saw his brother do the same thing over at Seaguard, and it worked. Blackwalder threatened to hang Patrick Mallister, and Jason Mallister opened his gates. But Blackwalder has a reputation as a killer, and Patrick Mallister was expendable. Not to Jason Mallister, but Edmure Tully, they don't want to kill him. They want to have a child. There's one element that wants to have a child off of him with his blood. So that's the difference here, the risk. If Edmure calls Jaime's bluff and says, I don't believe you, you'll destroy the Riverrun and slay my child, so what? Jaime made this bluff in private where no one can hear him, and if Edmure learns that Jaime lied to him and made a bluff he couldn't carry through on, well, that doesn't change his reputation that much because only one person heard it. Ryman backed down from his threat in front of everybody. Okay, you might say, well, then Aziz, though he clearly lost his exchange with Blackfish, didn't Jaime lose nothing there as well because there was nothing at risk? After all, his reputation was in no way riding on that parlay with Blackfish going well, and no one heard them speak either. Yeah, fair point. If he lost anything, it's that Blackfish got to read his soul for a few minutes, what is usually is referred to in the story as taking the measure of the man. I would not underestimate that. Jaime maybe underestimates it. But I would not. I think Brynden getting a sense of Jaime by having a conversation with him, seeing what strategies he tries, seeing that weak lie he attempted, seeing this is really how he's going to come at me. It can say a lot about a person. When you're insightful and perceptive, the strategies people use against you can tell you a lot about what their intent is, about what their situation is, things like that. It's also fair to say it might not amount to much advantage for Blackfish later either. He may not be able to use these weapons against Jaime later. So now there's a conundrum. All this, despite the awkwardness of this siege and the unpacking of the ways that these folk all bluffed each other and lied to each other, is it good that Edmure believed Jaime? Probably. Maybe. A lot of deaths would have happened if he stormed the castle, because that part was not a bluff. I mean, he was going to storm the castle either way. The bluffing part was I'll also destroy the castle and shoot your baby off, through a trebuchet and all that. So it's kind of like a parallel to Dragonstone, by the way, too. Storming the castle when, waiting a little longer might have worked, but time is of the essence, things like that. Or maybe he really did believe Jaime in all those embellishments, or maybe he didn't. Maybe he just realized that storming the castle would still result in a lot of death. Tearing down enough of this damage, that's still a worthwhile reason to surrender. He didn't have to believe the elements of the embellishments to decide that surrender is correct regardless. So it might seem like Edmure fell for some of this bluffing, some of these lies, but perhaps he just simply yielded to the real bottom line of so many deaths. We've seen that Edmure cares about that sort of thing. He was one of the most sympathetic to the plight of the common folk when Tywin launched his reign of terror on his domain. So it's not clear, but Jaime sells it big time that the chapter, this part of the chapter ending with Thomas Evans, who's not yet revealed to be Thomas Evans, but we know it's Thomas Evans. It's revealed the next chapter. So he really tries to sell his argument, his bluff with music. Like, well, if my words aren't enough, let me add the Rains of Castamere to it, because, yeah, good threats need a soundtrack, right? And that's about as on the nose as a song could be. Here's where he's wrong, though. Let's get back to him thinking about who he thinks he is. Quote,
if his aunt had been there, would she still say Tyrion was Tywin's son?
Yes. Again, those were bluffs. Those were words. Even Jaime sort of knows this, even though maybe he would have been willing to force himself to do some of these things that he was hoping would just have to be words. Maybe he's like, well, I got to back this all up now. But still, he's lying to himself, and he reveals where his head is. He wants to be like his father, but this is not how his father would handle things. There's a number of signs in this chapter that even through his own inner monologue that it would have gone differently if Tywin were there. But it worries me. In what other ways Jaime will eventually try to emulate Tywin? Is he going to continue to try to be like his father? And will he succeed, or will he break free? Nina writes that Jaime just came off violently educating Ryman Frey on not making threats he's not prepared to carry out, and he's already given the order to have Riverrun stormed at first light, and he's already privately blamed Brynden for giving him no choice but to attack. More personally, Jaime's smarting from the comment Jenna made about him not really being Tywin's son. So from her point of view, that is Nina's, not Jenna's, that he is a little bit on tilt. He's making decisions a little bit emotionally because of how people view him and about how he wants to be seen and as worthy of Tywin, which is so mixed up because he was rejecting his father when his father was still alive. He's like, I don't want to be like you. I don't want Cashley Rock. I don't want this and that. So now that he's gone, he's still got guilt over that. He's still values the way his father's reputation was useful to keeping people in line, things like that. But Nina thinks that Edmure, he would have gone through with all of it. If Edmure said, no, I don't believe you, he would have done all those things. It's just to maintain appearances. And I believe that. I do believe that as well. Even though I still will call it a bluff because I think that he doesn't expect to have to go through with it. Even if he's willing to, that doesn't mean he expects to. He's fully expecting his words to work. And that comes up in poker too. There's a term called a semi-bluff. When you bluff with very little of a hand, let's say you have a small percentage chance to hit a hand that is unlikely to be beaten. So you represent that you already have that hand, and maybe your 10% chance hits, and you do end up winning. That's kind of like what's happening here. Jaime doesn't really want to go through with all this. But if he has to, well, he's prepared to hit that inside straight and do it. And I also feel strongly that he just hates all this. Yeah, he's trying to be like Tywin because he's emotionally geared that way. But he also wants to be honorable. He's also trying to be Golden Hand the Just. And this chapter is a real mixed bag in that front because he is, on one hand, he's avoiding the bloodshed. On the other hand, trying to be like Tywin is not a good path. And we have the same shared delusion that comes about when everyone pretends to be loyal to the people that just pummeled them brutally and bloodily into submission. Quote,
around him, he glimpsed the faces of men he'd done his best to kill in the Whispering Wood, where the Freys had fought beneath the direwolf banners of Robb Stark. His golden hand hung heavy at his side.
Symbolic there, for sure. The gold, symbolic of not just his house and the legacy it has established, literally weighing him down, hanging heavy at his side. The weight of his father and his family's actions is a really big deal. It's really affecting everything. It casts a shadow on on everything. And they're all living a lie here. That's why his inner monologue is so often at odds with the words coming out of his mouth. Just a moment before this quote, two men actually pee on each other in an attempt to catch a glimpse of them. Someone's like, oh, Kingslayer or Jaime Lannister. No one says Kingslayer out loud like that when he's around, unless they're trying to insult him. But Sir Jaime, etc. And they're looking around. They want to see him. He's famous. He's a celebrity. Sometimes that slips from our mind because we're inside his head and it's a lot more personal. But he hates that too because he hates what he's most famous for, which is being the Kingslayer. And he doesn't feel like he deserves this kind of attention. He doesn't like it. And he wants to be known for other things. So, let's talk for a minute about some of these Freys. Recall that it was Ryman and Edwin who led the delegation that met King Robb and Cat when they arrived for the Red Wedding. And Grey Wind snarled at them. It's not much, but it's good to see that Ryman and Edwin aren't doing well. Imagine being such a failure that you're sent home from a siege. That's Ryman Frey for you. Heir to the twins. Well, he was. Now he's dead. Here's another great comedic line that comes as Jaime sends Ryman home.
See that you are not in camp when the sun comes up. You may take your queen of whores, but not that crown of hers. Jaime turned from Ser Ryman to his son. Edwin, I am giving you your father's command. Try not to be so stupid as your sire.
That ought not to pose much difficulty, my lord. Edwin, though funny here, doesn't think it's so funny when his father is killed on the way home with 3 knights and 12 men-at-arms. That's a sizable party to be hanged by the Brotherhood. Now, he's going to blame Blackwalder, not the Brotherhood, because, well, Blackwalder's a murderer who wants to be Lord of the Twins, so that totally makes sense that he would worry and suspect that. So it's wrong, probably, but not wrong to be suspicious of that particular figure. Jaime is quick to point out the treachery originates from the phrase regarding the Red Wedding, right? He says, Edwin's like, you Riverlords are traitors, and Jaime's like, you are twice the traitor they are. And so it's kind of nice seeing Ryman treated this way and getting a little comeuppance. And as according to Joe, it looks like Jaime and Catelyn both can claim to have slapped Ryman Frey. Catelyn slapped him at the Red Wedding, right when she realized what was going on. Ryman insists on running his mouth, and like Red Ron Connington gets a hit from the famous golden hand. So now it's 2 people smacked by that golden hand, and Jaime is sort of reminding the phrase that they're lording it over everyone here, especially the other river lords, and Jaime's kind of reminding them that, look, I'm in charge. The Lannisters are in charge. We're not partners in this endeavor. You had a deal with my father that doesn't make you equals. And he tries to take back that crown. He says, I'll take back that crown. But he actually doesn't. As Nina points out, the crown ends up in Lady Stoneheart's hands. We see her looking at it in Brienne's chapter, and it doesn't make her happy. Joe Buckley also writes that this is for Dacey, because Ryman and his men killed Dacey Mormont, along with others. But we see that one more clearly. So, some good takes from Nina here. She doesn't want to give Jaime too much credit for putting down Edwin, even though it's funny. I agree with that. The point of calling him twice as traitorous, smacking around Ryman, it is fun, but it does raise bigger questions. In other words, what does it say about not just Jaime, but the Lannister regime as a whole? Yeah, it's proper to put them in their place and to demean them. But you allied with these people. You took them as your friends. You did reach out or accept their reaching out and say, yes, we'll do this with you. You can't distance yourself from that now. You bought this. You have to, and now you own it, and everyone knows you bought it and own it. The Freys and the Lannisters are a thing. You can't break that apart so easily. Over time, perhaps, but like this, like right away, no. Y'all are in bed right now. That's how it looks to just about everyone. Jaime's trying to pretend it isn't so, but it is so. Just like the Manderleys will throw lots of insults that's in the north, that's happening everywhere. Lots of people, despite the drop-off in honor in things like guest right and sworn words, this has fallen off so recently, a lot of people are still bitter about it, and this is who they blame. It's Tywin and Walder Frey getting the blame, and Roose Bolton getting the blame for the death of these traditions in a lot of people's minds. Not everyone sees it that way, but it's a pretty common sentiment. A couple other figures that are important to consider here that might be important later. There's a lot of characters who are sort of tertiary, sort of circling around these main plots that might matter more later, so it might pay big time to pay more attention to them now. We see some pretty bad ideas at council. Strongbor is kind of the same he was when they were facing the stories of the Hound being a bandit over near Derry. He's like, I'll fight the Hound. And now he's like, I'll fight Blackfish. He's just, yeah, like, what are you really saying here? I was like, sure, you'll fight them, but how? How are you getting them to fight you? Where is this fight taking place? You know, he's just like, I'll do it. And in both cases, it's like, well, why would they choose to fight you one-on-one like that? What's their benefit? It's like, he's just displaying bravery, like, I'm brave and strong, but there's no point to it. There's no meaning behind it. There's no strategy, no thought to it. I think there's some important symbolism there. You've got this, what good is a brave, strong knight without any purpose, without any strategy, without any good guidance? It's just a strong guy who wants to fight people. That's is not really accomplishing anything. So I think you have maybe a suggestion of it's important to have goals and duties that are tangible, and fighting for honor, things like that really matter. Without those things, these other things fall apart. These other societal underpinnings rely on people being able to trust each other and have basic deals and be basic trust. You don't have to be able to trust people with your life, but basic, simple trust is required for society to function. And the Riverlands doesn't even have that right now. On the other hand, you have a dysfunctional relationship here between the nobility. The River Lords are quite clearly unhappy with the situation for obvious reasons, and quite clearly would flip to another option if they had one, whether it's Aegon the Sixth, whether it's a renewed Kingdom of the North with Jon Snow crowned or something like that. They will happily, given the chance, throw off this Lannister Frey yoke, happily bathe in Frey blood like the mountain clansmen, hill clansmen in the north want to bathe in Bolton blood. And interesting too that this was a siege. When we first got to this spot, we considered how this was like a double siege, how the Brotherhood and the Wolves were sort of besieging the besiegers. And even though the main siege is now broken, the Brotherhood is still shadowing Jaime, as we'll see. He's going to be confronted by Brienne at the end of his Dance with Dragons chapter, not at the end of a feast, but it's the same plot line spread farther out. Anyway, Joe Buckley points out something important here. This is where Jaime commands the Freys to send their captives to King's Landing. So far, it hasn't happened as far as we know. If I were Walder Frey, I would probably hem and haw at that, and they're not going to come attack him over not doing that, so maybe he can hold on to them, and maybe the situation will change. But let's not forget, one of those candidates one of those captives, rather, is the Great John. I suppose another one is Mark Piper, who is brought up in this chapter as Lord Piper is the one that has that insult to Edwin's face and storms out of the tent. It's his son who is one of the captives that gets mentioned. So opens up a lot of possibilities. If these captives are at King's Landing, they could fall into the hands of Aegon if he takes the capital. That's a huge deal, right? And I mean, if the captives aren't transferred, well, then if the Freys ever get their comeuppance, I suppose they just get freed then, and then the Great John's back in the game. That's interesting. But if they're captured by Aegon, then he's got them as hostages. And, well, now we're getting a little too far into the realm of theories built on theories. But still, it's worth considering the location of these captives and who might end up controlling them as the throne switches. Also, maybe they just die in captivity if, like, wildfire gets unleashed on King's Landing, something like that. That's not a fun thought, but certainly rational as an option or possibility. Joe also points out that this is not like a lot of other castles in the Riverlands, in that it's been ruled by a couple of different houses or multiple different houses. This is certainly no Harrenhal. Riverrun has only ever been ruled by the Tullys. So this is a really big historic moment when the castle switches hands. It's not, it isn't necessarily presented that way, but that is a fact. This is the first house to rule Riverrun other than House Tully at any point that we know of. And we also see Joe points to a couple of reminders of some of the things that Jaime really doesn't want to say or doesn't want to do. For example, he thinks, "Must you make me say the words?" right before he launches that big threat against Edmure. In part, yeah, he doesn't want to say those words. It dishonors him. It shames him, even though he knows he's not going to have to carry through that. Or at least he's confident that he won't have to actually carry through on that threat. Just the saying of the words dishonors him and shames him. But he's doing it. A lot of people notice that this chapter is, in fact, the whole Riverlands arc for Jaime, while interesting, while thought-provoking, while setting up a lot, is depressing in one way, which in that it is Jaime seems to be backsliding. He was, and it's ironic because around his sister he was growing as he was rejecting her. Now that he's away from her, he's trying to be more like their father, which is like, that seems a little backwards. Not, I'm not criticizing the writing, but because obviously human beings are contradictory all the time. It's not an unrealistic thing. It's just very notable and but it is very human, isn't it? So Edmure screams about the choice of Tom 7 strings. Most of this we attribute to the Floppy Fish song. After all, Tom himself wrote the Floppy Fish song that Edmure hates, that supposedly mocks him directly. So that's why he's like, no, not him, because he actually recognized him or something. But there's more to it. He realizes too that he's trapped, and this threat that Jaime has dropped on him is really no escape from it. and there's really no need to pile on at this point. Yeah, it's Nina who made the catch about the crown. Yes, so when Jaime's like, I'll take that crown, and then Ryman leaves because he's told to leave the siege camp. He takes the crown with him, so he's kind of like being willful, like, well, I'm not giving the crown away. And then, so that's how we know that he took it, because, well, how else did Lady Stoneheart end up with it in Brienne's chapter, which is, not long from now. So
you think we'll see Lady Stoneheart wear it eventually, and she'll be Queen Stoneheart?
Whoa. No, I don't think so.
Queen of the Stoneheart?
Okay, a couple of thoughts from you guys. Looks like Josh Davis, super chat from Down Under, super pair sticker. Appreciate that, Josh. Thanks very much. Maura Lee says a huge thank you to Aziz and Ashea for the fabulous content in this one of my favorite series on your channel. Love you both and the kitties. Well, we appreciate that so much, Maura. We were a little worried about how today's episode would go off at the start because the two brothers, Casanova and Xerxes, were just entering romping mode when they just start to get they're going to run around and cause all sorts of havoc. And we're like, right when we're starting to record, guys, really? Luckily, they ran out of the room for it, so. Lady Dillsdale says he got that brooch to irritate Hoster. Yeah, that's a good call. He probably did. I guess he probably did, because he did take that name to irritate Hoster, so might as well fill it out with a piece of jewelry. Make it official. That's a good call. Dornish Dame says Jaime has a lot of experience with Cersei's opinion of Robert's bastards. That's a good point. In terms of having opinions of these bastards, yes. Noga Frankel says, I think Blackfish really doesn't trust Jon. I mean, Robb was wrong about Theon. Hey, that's a great point, because he does bring up Theon at the same time. He says Cat also didn't trust Theon, and he was right about them both. So now, or she was right about them both. Now, when he says she was right about them both, well, what evidence would he be pointing to about Jon, about Cat being right about Jon? What did Jon do that proves Cat was right about him? Nothing. There isn't anything. So that's why I have doubts that Blackfish is telling the truth here, or that he's not lying. He's just omitting the true part of truth here. But you do raise a good point. It's possible that because Robb's judgment was off on Theon, that Blackfish would be wary of trusting Robb's judgment on Jon, and would default instead to Cat's judgment, since Cat was right about Theon. So that is a good point, but I guess we can say that it is not clear. Aegon VI says he was defending Jane as a priority oath. One might think he had a good relationship with Robb. Also true, and that is a crucial point here. That Blackfish cares about his oaths, and he swore to protect Jane Westerling. That's a big deal. Now, he had no choice but to surrender. It's not his castle. When Edmure says, look, surrender the castle, that includes the prisoners there, including Jane Westerling. That's just beyond Blackfish's authority. But as long as it was in his charge, he was going to follow through. So that's a good point. So it's another reminder that Aegon VI here makes that Robb and Blackfish were tight and maybe discussed such things. So it's not necessarily the issue of whether Blackfish learned about Jon from Robb. It's whether or not he posthumously trusts Robb's read on Jon's personality, given that he was wrong about Theon. Anyway, and Kirk Evans says, it's strange to think of Robb having long talks about Jon with Blackfish, or is that just me? Maybe not long talks, but having it come up at some point, like having his opinion raised, be like Robb saying something nice about Jon, or just not saying something insulting, saying something half positive. Like when Jon thought, or not Jon, but when Ned had that moment in his mind when he thought Rhaegar probably didn't go to brothels, right? That isn't a compliment, but it's notably unnegative from a guy who we, at that point in the story, thought Rhaegar was that thought Ned would have a lot of reason to hate Rhaegar. Yet here he is having this kind of nuanced, neutral opinion. So it's kind of Blackfish being a very observant guy. If he hears Robb say things like that, he might read into it. Ramsay Snow says the Lords of the Trident supported Robb because he was half Tully. If a half Tully kid shows up, I think Blackfish will prefer Rickon or Sansa to Jon. That is true as well. It's interesting to consider ins and outs of the possibilities of Rob's descent and his will. You wonder if Blackfish will just go along with the will or go, no, Tully's should have this. That's a great question. I really don't know what's in Blackfish's mind on what he prefers. I think he'll go with the will because that's the word of his king, but it's no sure thing. And Kirk Evans says Edmure has a lot more to lose than Blackfish. In poker terms, pretty much all of Blackfish's chips are in the pot, so Jaime raising the bet wouldn't faze him. By contrast, Edmure is still holding lots of chips. Yes, that's true as well. I agree with that because Edmure isn't going to be killed or sent to the wall by surrendering. And Blackfish is like, look, I'm saying we're going to fight to the death. That's a bigger bet. Edmure hasn't made such a promise, hasn't made such a claim that it's death or dishonor and there's no middle ground. That is a good metaphor for having more chips in the pot. I also want to point out, well, I guess I did already, the Loras and Jaime Dragonstone Riverrun parallel. I guess I pointed out the Dragonstone Riverrun parallel, not necessarily the comparison between them as people in this spot and having to rush the issue and force it. But they didn't have to. Jaime's negotiations worked. Loras maybe didn't try that hard, although he did they did both offer single combat with the guy in charge. I'm also reminded of a great classic film when Jaime thinks to himself, this is a war council, not a war. It really reminds me of Dr. Strangelove. There's a really fantastic scene in that film where they're in the war room and Peter Sellers, who is playing the role of the president of the United States, says, "Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room." That's such a good movie. And it stars Slim Pickens, real name. Stefan B says, Jaime's Riverlands arc seems like backsliding for him, enforcing Lannister family tradition stuff, the exact kind of things he was moving away from because he sees the dishonor in it. And but yeah, so that is kind of sad. I did bring this up briefly before, but it one aspect of this I didn't raise is, it's what happens on the TV show, isn't it? Jaime starts to break away from Cersei, but then just comes fully back on her side. They completely reunite, don't they? And maybe that doesn't happen in the books, but I wouldn't bank on it not happening in the books. I would guess that they're going to be reunited and have a second getting back together, a renewal of their love, so to speak. It's going to be sad, but it's probably going to happen. So this is sort of like, this backsliding is almost like foreshadowing for that. C. Nicole 19 asks, would Blackfish think that Jon allied with Stannis? That's also a very good question. He doesn't bring it up, but maybe that's what he means. Maybe that's what he was talking about when he said it seems like Kat was right about both Theon and Jon. Maybe he's referring to Jon being friendly with Stannis as evidence that he's a traitor, or that he's a traitor to the Stark cause. You'd think he'd say that. You'd think he'd be specific and say, "Oh, look, Jon, this Jon guy's allied with Stannis." So I don't know. I feel like because he was so undetailed about Jon, about why, that leaves a lot of room for different interpretations. But that is a great point as far as what Blackfish could have said. If Jaime had pressed Blackfish on that argument, he would have been like, "Look, Stannis, blah blah blah." It might have been a good follow-up argument for Blackfish to try to sell his story. So it seems like y'all had a lot of thoughts on that one. I really appreciate when you guys get highly engaged like that. But it is time to move on to the next one. Cersei 9. As always, Jaime and Cersei chapters right next to each other. There's only occasionally is that not true, and that's because Cersei has more chapters than Jaime, and there's one Jaime chapter that's 2 chapters away from Cersei rather than 1. But pretty much every other time, they're paired up. This one we call The Gang Throws a Moon Tea Party, a.k.a. Orton, Who's a Hand. That, of course, is a reference to Horton Hears a Who, the classic Dr. Seuss book, and Orton Merriweather, and this one receives the title Hand of the Queen. Really, this one could be called the one where one does not refuse the queen, or just one does not refuse the queen. Cersei gives orders and offers people gifts that aren't really gifts, and no one wants any of it. Promotion to hand? Orton has to take it, but he doesn't want it. Pycelle's discomforted his orders regarding the moon tea and the falsified Rosby inheritance. Clearly, that weighs heavily on him. The man can't even stand up after receiving those orders. He hates it so much. It shames him to do these things. The Blue Bard, talk about forcing someone into something they don't want to do. Talk about the forcing part, especially. Even Osney Kettleblack doesn't want to go lie to the High Sparrow, but he too has made an offer he can't refuse in the form of sex. I suppose the exception is Qyburn. The only person in this chapter that's like getting what he wants and is happy about doing what he's told is Qyburn. What does that tell you? Like when the sadist evil doctor guy is the only one getting what he wants, you know something's wrong. And it's important too to note as we go through this chapter that it's in her next one that everything falls apart. Almost. See, that's what's so important here. When you read this chapter for the first time, you're like, oh, it's all falling apart for Cersei. This is the end for Cersei. But that is wrong. Consider what I was just saying at the end of Jaime 6 just now. That they're going to get back together. They're going to have probably have this whole renewal of themselves and of their power. I believe for Cersei, it's meant to be similar to the Defiance of Duskendale, which is rather perfect because Aerys and Cersei have so much in common. Aerys was a bad king before he was a mad king, right? Duskendale is what really pushed him to his worst, to his most unstable and cruel, and Westeros suffered that for several years before they had enough and Robert's Rebellion kicked off. As Cersei rushes headlong into folly and cruelty here, I strongly suspect the worst is yet to come from her as well. That's right, even as we see what she does to the Blue Bard and all others that she consigned to Qyburn, I'm here to say this will get worse. Just like I was saying that with Euron. Just with Euron, it can always get worse. With Cersei, it can get worse too. Just as negotiation and intrigue failed for Aerys, it's going to fail for Cersei. Not good at being subtle? Then be blunt. Aerys stopped trying to undermine Tywin from behind the scenes, stopped trying to one-up him socially. He just started doing things in front of everyone. Outside of Tywin, he started burning people with wildfire. But, instead of look at how bad Tywin looks, I'm going to reverse his orders, he just takes his heir away in front of everyone. He's like, no, your son's now in the Kingsguard. That was an escalation, not a part of the normal back and forth between Tywin and Aerys. This was him moving things to another level, and that's what caused it to come to a head. And look what he did to Brandon and Rickard Stark. Talk about getting the death of subtlety. He's like, yeah, I'll just start burning nobles openly now. That's what we do these days. This is exactly what Cersei is heading towards. Cersei, she's not good at subtlety and intrigue. So I don't think she's going to keep going back to it. She's not going to admit to herself that she's not good at it. She's just going to move on from it because it's not working the way she wants it to. And let's be honest, she isn't that good at it. She's mucking up all kinds of plans here. It might work better for her to be better, right? Better in finger quotes, because it's not good for her to act more like the Mad King. But if she thinks it's going to work, if she thinks it's going to be more effective, if she's tired of the behind-the-scenes stuff and wants direct action, well, she's going to do it. She's not going to hesitate because it's wrong to do. That's not the kind of person Cersei is. So yes, Cersei's actions this chapter lead to a fall, but not a downfall. It's a setback. That's the real foreshadowing here on Reread. She's going to recover her power. It's a big setback, but it's not a final setback. This is her part of her journey as a character. Now, I don't think in the end of everything it's going to end well for her, but we're still a long way from Cersei's ending, I think. Functionally, A Feast for Crows is setting all that up. She can't be out of the narrative that quickly. She's going to lose to Aegon, most likely, but still be in the game. She'll flee west and get back in it at some point, roughly speaking. Doesn't have to go exactly like that. The point is she's not going to die for a while. So I think even this chapter, while it's actually setting up her setback, should be read as foreshadowing for her changing her methods, for what's going to... Because she's so privileged, she actually gets a second chance here. Now, we've learned a lot about Cersei and her POV, and while she likes to compare herself to her father, she's often wrong, but not always. She definitely has some of his qualities, and one of them is vindictiveness. And that's another reason why I'm heavily banking on this plot to go this way for her. Because while we can expect her to maybe have a true downfall eventually, she's not only going to drag a lot of people down to hell with her at the time, she's going to stack up a high body count along the way because she's going to have a lot of people to get revenge on. That's as sure as sunrise that the Queen of Skulls will be back to take revenge on people like the High Sparrow, on Marjorie Tyrell, all the people that caused this, whoever they are, whoever she thinks they are. We know who some of them are, but it's not necessarily going to be the real players that she takes out her revenge on. She's going to get revenge on people she thinks are guilty, who she thinks are involved, not necessarily the actual movers and shakers. For example, well, she constantly gets things wrong about who's coming for her and who the real players are anyway. She underestimates Littlefinger, underestimates Taina Merryweather, underestimates Grandmaster Pycelle even. And this is not the kind of person that you would expect would properly chase their enemies, because she's seeing enemies where they don't exist and seeing enemies amongst her allies when they are allies. Although, to be fair, she doesn't have a lot of real allies because she's kind of pushes them away. So this first line of this chapter reminds us that one of the guys I just mentioned has seen all this before from this same high position, seeing history repeat itself. Quote,
Grandmaster Pycelle had been old for as long as she had known him, but he seemed to have aged another 100 years in the past 3 nights.
Yeah, he saw Aerys. He saw Duskendale. He saw all this develop. He saw Aerys go from maybe not great, but not insane, to what he was when Robert's Rebellion broke out, which was insane by that point. Though it's hard to feel sorry for Pycelle, you still... this is hypocritical injustice, and it's enough to make some people feel for him. And you can still realize how wrong this is without feeling bad for the man, Pycelle, because the guy's, a pedophile and not a good person. But still, the hypocrisy is overwhelming. How could he have saved Giles Rosby? We went through that at the time. It couldn't have happened. How could he have saved Tywin? How could he have saved Joffrey? He couldn't have. Yet Cersei blames him for all these things. And what? And blames him for Robert, even though Cersei wanted Robert dead. Blames him for Jon Arryn, even though she wanted Jon Arryn dead, which he tries to bring up, but she just, yells over him, basically. So... let's check out this quote from all the way back in A Clash of Kings about this very situation with Pycelle, Jon Arryn, and such, because it's very relevant to what's happening in Sansa's chapters as well.
When he felt the blood trickling down his neck and onto his chest, the old man shuddered, and the last strength went out of him. He looked shrunken, both smaller and frailer than he had been when they burst in on him. "Yes," he whimpered. "Yes, Coleman was purging, so I sent him away. The queen needed Lord Arryn dead. She did not say so, could not. Varys was listening, always listening. But when I looked at her, I knew. It was not me who gave him the poison, though, I swear it."
And that's true, too. We know he didn't poison Jon Arryn. That was Lysa herself. So this quote is really quite perfect in showing a lot of the roles reversed while calling back that similar event from the past. Pycelle knows what Cersei wants him to say out loud, but doesn't want to, and has to be forced out of him. In the case of Jon Arryn, he gladly did her bidding with a mere suggestion. So, again, we're reminded that Cersei really could have used Pycelle if she just treated him a little better and didn't make such awkward decisions and then get mad at Pycelle for questioning her. And again, this is the same Maester Coleman referred to in that quote, who is the same one forced to slowly poison Robert Arryn. So Coleman was doing the right thing for Jon Arryn, and Pycelle reversed that. Coleman's mostly doing the right things for Robert Arryn, but he's being undermined by Littlefinger's threats there, not unlike what Pycelle is facing here. So we see how often, these Maesters, they have this duty. They swear to do no harm, sort of like a modern Hippocratic oath. But these extremely powerful people force them to do harm by, subtle or not so subtle threats. Joe points out in this book, it's basically been the same conversation over and over again. Pycelle either trying to talk some actual sense into Cersei or just blinking incredulously at her choices, with Cersei responding that Pycelle's an idiot. And he's like, I'm the idiot? And finally, when he's really forced into it, he has to, something gives a little ways here. Because before he's sticking up for other people or bringing up other things, this time it's more directly involving him. Now let's go to the dinner. Let's go to this dinner she has with Taena and Orton and the poor Blue Bard. The depths of hate required to do what she does here, it's hard to wrap your head around. Sending Felice and Sanel and the others was no less horrible, to be clear, but I don't recall her having delusions about it. I mean, she lies to herself about it. That's different than being fully delusional about it. And this is also the first time that she directly participates in the torture. Other times she just kind of like, I don't want to hear about it. Just give me the results. That's more like Robert style. We talked about how Cersei is like Aerys, but also how she's like Robert. The turning a blind eye bit, that's more Robert-like. This more watching the torture is more like Aerys, if not Maegor the Cruel. And the description of the character we were foreshadowing Cersei becoming is also more like Maegor the Cruel than Aerys, though she certainly has traits of them both. So what I mean with the delusion, though, this time she's just really into it. I mean, she thinks of how the Blue Bard's eyes remind her of Robert, which gets her hate to an even bigger fever pitch than it already was. And when he starts, telling the truth, she slams his lute into his face so viciously that there's splinters. You really got to hit someone hard to do that while screaming liar. I mean, talk about playing a role, right? She's playing it up for effect, but man, she's awfully confident in this story. Like, she's accepted that he really is lying, even though she's also accepted that he's got to be forced to lie for them. So she's really kind of mixed up about it, and I think she's struggling with the intensity of this violence and her, because I mean, she does, as harsh and brutal as she is, it does weigh on her. She wakes up and I mean, she goes to sleep and has nightmares about it. So she's trying to pretend that she's above this cruelty, that her father would do the same thing and face it, but she's not entirely. It is weighing on her. She's just pushing those thoughts away. Very toxic. She's not engaging what her own feelings are telling her. So as Alayne is becoming more and more Alayne, and Arya is becoming Cat of the Canals and other characters, Cersei is becoming something else. She's becoming what she thinks is like her father. She thinks it's a better version of her father, but it's not. It's something that's got parts of her father, but it's really, like I said, it's more like a lot of these Targaryen kings or Robert, but less like Robert all the time and more like Aerys and Maegor. And hey, Jaime was doing that same thing a chapter ago at Riverrun, convincing himself that he's Tywin. So this is a wonderful but dark parallel between these twins. They both use extreme cruelty as well, though Jaime's was only threatened. Though, as we described, he may have been willing to go through with it if he was forced. Cersei here feels like she's forced too. She blames this on Marjorie. She blames this on others. Like, well, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have to do this. Jaime does the same thing. Jaime blames Blackfish. He's like, well, if Blackfish would just surrender, I wouldn't have to kill everyone. That's not really how this works, is it, y'all? I think you agree with me that they're putting blame on other people when it's really their responsibility. They're the ones taking the actions. You can't blame your dad who's dead anymore. You can't blame people defending or holding their oaths. You can't do that. That's just not how blame and responsibility works. So part of the time, her inner thoughts go from playing the role of justified aggressor to actually believing some of her own lies. And, for example, after torturing the Blue Bard for hours, she thinks to herself, he sure is persisting in his lies. But then Qyburn's like, nah, we'll get him to say whatever we want. But he doesn't even say that straightforwardly. He's like, don't worry, he'll say what he needs to say. Keep in mind that part of Cersei's motivation here is Well, Maggie the Frog, the prophecy. That's a big part of all this. The torture of the Blue Bard is horrific, no doubt. There's no way around that. Not that we're trying to get around that, but she's not just trying to extract information, she's planting false information. And again, she says it's all for Tommen. And that she's not necessarily lying. I mean, she is partly lying. It is partly for her. Obviously, she doesn't want to lose her throne. She doesn't want to die. She doesn't want the life choked out of her by a younger, more beautiful queen or whatever. However exactly she perceives it. But she definitely doesn't want Tommen in his golden shroud or Myrcella in hers. And so she tells herself it's all for Tommen when it's probably a lot for Tommen. But it's definitely a lot for her as well. But that is what's firing all this. Without the motivation of Maggie the Frog's prophecy, we're left to wonder whether she would be this brutal and dark and cruel. Would she still do this stuff to the Blue Bard and to Marjorie if she didn't have this sense, this certainty? It's misplaced certainty, I guess, but it is certainty in her mind that this is all going to happen. If she wasn't trying to avoid this prophecy, would she go this far? I don't know. It's really hard. It's a what if that we can't really answer. We can be pretty sure that Orton Merryweather knows this whole thing is a sham. You can tell by how nervous he is, by his looking around. He's like, I don't want to be here. He was quite likely informed by Taina ahead of time, because Taina and Cersei have this discussion about how to pin this all, how to use Pycelle's information, how to use the moon tea and all that. So she's well aware. She's had time to go talk to her husband and tell all this. And remember too that though Taina does learn about the Valonqar in this chapter, it's after dinner, not before. So that's crucial to keep the chronology important in line here. So Orton has little choice in this scene, just like the role thing I keep talking about, playing a role theme. He's forced to play along, but he can tell he's being sucked into something not just cruel, but dangerous. He's a Tyrell bannerman, a lord in the Reach. Like, he doesn't want to be implicated in this plot to get Marjorie executed. That's not good, even though he might be working with Varys, directly or indirectly. Taina almost certainly is. How much Orton Merryweather's in on it is unclear, though I strongly suspect he's very in on it. He does run away right out, like almost as soon as Cersei is imprisoned. He's just like, we're out of here. Now, normally Hand of the King, which he of course is named in this scene, would be expected to intercede or negotiate on the crown's behalf. Like, oh, I'm the Hand of the Queen and my queen just went to jail, so I got to do something about that. No, he leaves. So that's very telling. And of course, Taina runs off with him. So that's telling as well. They're walking a tightrope, the Merryweathers of Long Table here, because yes, they're probably friends of the Reach. They're probably working with Aegon and Varys to restore that whole thing. But they can't have anyone finding out about that while they're still bannermen to the Tyrells, even though probably some of the other bannermen to the Tyrells are on the same boat with them. But it's too soon to come out for Aegon. He hasn't even landed on the shores yet, in the Stormlands or anything. So that's premature. So they still have to pretend to be loyal to the Tyrells. And obviously, being implicated in a sloppy murder plot or plot to pin false accusations on someone is not the place to be if you're trying to not look like an enemy of the Tyrells. So, speaking of Taina, this is almost flies under the radar, and it ends so quickly that we don't necessarily see what's happened, is that she didn't really appoint Orton Merryweather to be Hand. She appointed Orton Merryweather to be Hand so Taina could be Hand, basically. Because Taina's the one that's at her right hand. She's the one discussing with her what to do about Pycelle, about the moon tea. She's the real brains that Cersei wants to keep around. Orton's the front. And this is not the first time this has happened. Nina points out that Martin Tyrell was named was named Master of Coin, but really it was Florence Fossaway who had the skills, and she did the work where he got the credit. And the same thing seems to have happened under Daeron the Good when Ronald Penrose was appointed Master of Coin, but openly it was kind of an open secret that Alayne Targaryen was actually the brains behind that operation, which is apparently, I think this is historic in the real world as well. There's almost certainly some examples out there of noble men getting the job because they're a noble man, but the skills lying with, either the wife or someone else in the family. Usually the wife, though, I would guess. So isn't it as a further example of how badly Cersei has misjudged Taina? She thinks that Taina's main interest is, she doesn't even think about the ambition that much anymore. She thinks her main interest is sex. Like, what? Here's the quote.
If it please you, that is all I desire. Liar. She knew what Taina desired. So be it. If the woman was besotted with her, that would help ensure that she and her husband remained loyal. In a world so full of treachery, that was worth a few kisses. She is no worse than most men. At least there is no danger of her ever getting me with child.
Yeah, well, that last part's true. The rest, though, she is no worse than most men? Nah, I don't think so. Not this woman. In a world so full of treachery, okay, that she's not wrong about that. But Cersei, you're part of the problem. You're far more treacherous than average. So Taina actually leads Cersei on with the Moon Tea plan here. At first, Cersei just doesn't need to be led on. She gets greedy about it. She's like, oh, what if we don't just implicate Marjorie, but like all of her cousins too? And even Taina's like, all of them? I don't know about that. And Cersei's like, yeah, all of them. Let's do it. But then Cersei backs down a little bit from the all of them to realizing she needs to add some detail to make the whole thing seem a little more realistic, such as Taina's suggestion of using Alla Tyrell, the shy one, to testify. So this is really interesting because Taina either has gone out on a limb here, promising something she can't deliver, or she knows something about Alla Tyrell that I don't know what that is. Because Alla Tyrell, we don't know very much about her at all. And the idea that Taina is very confident that she can get her to testify against all her friends and cousins. So I wonder what gives her that confidence. But it strikes me that it relates to who Taina is working with /for, which again, I do believe to be Varys. And maybe Varys has plans for Alla Tyrell or knows. This is a little confusing to me. I'm sure there's a good explanation, but it stands out as curious. And if any of y'all have theories on why Alla Tyrell is available to Taina like this, or perhaps she isn't. Maybe this is a lie. Maybe Cersei is being lied to. Now, setting aside Cersei's brutal method of making her version of events a reality, meaning that Marjorie's asking of Moon Tea, whether legit or not, actually means she was sleeping with somebody, which I think is a no. But let's try to unpack the truth. We understand the lie that's being sold here, but let's try to figure out what really happened. So we have to go back to Pycelle's quote-unquote admission about the Moon Tea, and we have this quote.
Oh, what? Sorry.
Lady Merryweather closed the door behind him? That one?
Lady Merryweather closed the door behind him. Moon Tea, she said, as she turned back to the queen. How foolish of her. Why would she do such a thing? Take such a risk?
Exactly. Why would she take such a risk? That's a great question, Taina. It is curious. But it's really hard to unpack all this. This is one of those examples where even those of us working on this episode, Nina and Joe and all our discussion groups, we don't fully agree on this. Not like it's not a debated hot topic, but the opinions that we all weighed in with there were some pretty distinct differences. So there is no aggregate opinion here. This isn't one of these theories that the fandom, or at least our corner of the fandom, is settled on. So let's at least unpack what we know. We can at least agree, probably, especially in a chapter where Pycelle's past Lannister loyalty is highlighted, that Marjorie going to Pycelle in the first place is at least curious, if not suspicious. Now, almost no one thinks Marjorie slept with anyone. On that much, there is agreement in our corner of the fandom. The theory that Marjorie is actually sleeping around doesn't have much support. The reason being, what Osney Kettleblack says is not only believable, but normal for a queen, for a princess in waiting to surround herself with friends, to share her bed with other girls. That way, there's just no. It keeps the rumors at bay. Like when the fact that Osnia never had alone time with her is the point. By assuring she never has alone time with anyone, it keeps people from making suggestions like this. Nina's suggestion is that Margaery was asking Pycelle on behalf of one of her friends, saying like her friend was too ashamed to go, and so Margaery did it for her. Now, other people agree with this theory without seeing Nina's suggestion. I saw at least a couple people on Flick and maybe Facebook make the same suggestion. Makes sense. After all, we've seen some of these cousins and friends talk about their crushes and spend time with them. It's not like Margaery where they're kept apart and always have other people around. And they're not the center of attention like Margaery is. So they can find alone time, whereas she can't. So that's a possibility. Joe, on the other hand, suggests that how is it possible that no one in Margaery's retinue has the ability to make moon tea? Why would Pycelle be necessary at all? Nina suggests maybe because he would have the best stuff, maybe going to a backwoods solution isn't ideal, but this is still a group of noble ladies. You'd think that they would be able to do it pretty well. Maybe. Not definitely. So let's consider a couple of possibilities. Let's give Margaery very little credit for thinking this through and look at what that looks like, and then give her a lot of credit and think what that looks like. So if we're open to her making a mistake, then asking on someone's behalf, she might not realize the implication there. She might not realize that it looks like she's doing it for herself. She may trust too much in the maester's oath to keep quiet. She might think, okay, well, maesters aren't supposed to talk. I'll trust that. That's not very clever, but it's possible. Certainly if Olenna was around, that kind of thing wouldn't happen. Now let's consider the other side. If Margaery is being clever, if she's aware of Pycelle's Lannister toadiness and not trusting in this maester's oath, then maybe it's bait. Maybe she knows Cersei will jump on this opportunity, expecting it to backfire. The reason this has some credibility as an option is because, while you might say, that's really dangerous with the High Sparrow being around, isn't it? Absolutely it is. But the High Sparrow is a new player in the game, and the Tyrells don't necessarily know how dangerous he is yet. Cersei doesn't even realize how dangerous he is yet. Really, that's available to us readers and maybe a few of the smarter people around court, but it's not a widespread opinion. This is playing with fire if they know, or if they don't know. And I don't think they do. So it's really dangerous if they know how dangerous the High Sparrow is and they go through with it. But more likely, I think they just don't understand his threat yet. And so if you remove him from the equation, Margaery taking this risk isn't that risky. Because because she has all this plausible deniability. She's got all these friends that can vouch for her and say, no, she never slept with this person or that person. So maybe she thinks she can win at trial, make Cersei look bad, something like that. Have it backfire, setting Cersei up for a backfiring. So, but it's entirely possible that it's like the first option, which is that Margaery just miscalculated for a different reason, not understanding the risk here, setting aside the faith and just not realizing the implication of being seen as sleeping around. I tend towards the cleverer version of Margaery, though. She seems to be smart. But we've seen smart young people making naive mistakes is certainly a feature of A Song of Ice and Fire. So smart people doing dumb things is not unreasonable. That happens in the real world all the time. Another thing to note here, too, in regards to Cersei's maybe slowly moving towards changing how she operates and being more direct and blunt and brutal rather than trying to fail at intrigue. At first, Osmond Kettleblack, when he hears about Margaery, is like, I'll go kill her for you. Let me cut her head right off. And he's half joking, but not. And Cersei is kind of like, yeah, that might be the right way. Cersei sort of takes it seriously, somewhat, but then Taina says, the Tyrells have a lot of swords, too. If you want to do this, you're going to have to be a little more subtle about it. But that's interesting, because Taina shouldn't have to say anything. This isn't. It shouldn't be a serious suggestion in the first place. Yeah, no, I'll just go kill Marjorie. Like, of course you can't do that. Of course you can't just walk over to her room and kill her. Cersei might start thinking that sort of thing's a good idea later. But we're still in a society that doesn't do that. We've seen other things fall off, guest rights falling off, honors falling off, but we still aren't having people directly walk across the hall to kill each other. Not quite yet. So what I'm saying is, why would Taina take this threat seriously? Why would Taina take Osmond's casual mention of killing Marjorie seriously? Well, maybe because it is that serious. Maybe because we're onto something with this theory that Cersei is going to move more and more towards direct atrocities. And no one has their finger on Cersei's state of mind more than Taina Merryweather does right now. Let's be very clear on that. She knows Cersei better than anyone right now, even better than Jaime. Maybe not like as a whole, but her current state of mind.
Oh, I think they both know her as a whole.
Ayo. Yeah, Taina's even slept with her more recently. Hey. So it doesn't matter whether you think we're right about Varys being behind Taina, whoever's behind Taina, or even if Taina's sort of by herself, which I think is unlikely. She's either with someone or working for someone. This is the big time. In other words, whoever sent her, whether it's herself, this isn't the time for the B team. The bench players aren't getting sent into the game. If Varys is an agent, has Taina as an agent, she's one of his best. They send their best to do the most important work when possible. Sending idiots to do important jobs is what Cersei does. That's what she did with the Stokeworth situation. She's like, oh yeah, I'll send Balman Birch to do my work for me. And then she's like, Osney Kettleblack, I'm going to send this guy to lie to the High Sparrow. That's real dumb. Not only is it dumb, it's failing to learn from her mistakes. When the theme is playing roles, Cersei, you're not a good casting director. You can't cast a brute in the role of a deceiver. As the High Sparrow will remind Cersei afterwards, he's heard a lot of confessions. He sniffed the falsehood out right away because he's heard lots of confessions, and this was unlike any confession he'd ever heard before, and that sent off the alarm bells and led to figuring out the lie behind it all. What do you expect? Sending a bad liar to tell a lie to a guy who's good at sensing lies? That's what we've come to expect. Cersei doesn't play her own role very well either, but I sure do enjoy reading about it. Now to the matter of Maggie the Frog. It starts pretty much right after the torture session. She's like returning from hell here.
The climb up the dark stone steps from the black cells left Cersei feeling breathless. I must rest. Getting to the truth was wearisome work, and she dreaded what must follow. I must be strong. What I must do, I do for Tommen and the realm. It was a pity that Maggie the Frog was dead. Piss on your prophecy, old woman. The little queen may be younger than I, but she has never been more beautiful, and soon she will be dead.
So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, she has actual nightmares after this. It's guilt. When she wakes, Taina's ready. She's like, I'm going to coax this out of you. Cersei being misguided on Taina's intentions helps make her more at ease, and she tells the story. It's pretty surprising that she tells Taina. I think I mentioned that she told Taina. I think I misspoke in an earlier episode and said that she'd already told Taina, or that she told Taina. I think I meant to say she will tell Taina. Anyway, this is clearly when it happens, and this is partly interesting because she previously believed that talking about it, saying it out loud, made it more likely to become reality, which is part of why she killed Melara Heatherspoon, to keep her from talking. So, well, there's no way around it now. By telling Taina and then time passing, which will, is going to happen when she's in prison in the Sept. So that secret's out there now. Taina has told people. By the time Cersei's out of her imprisonment, there's no way to contain the secret anymore. She couldn't possibly expect to be able to kill all the people that know that she fears the Valonqar, that she fears her children being sent to be in golden shrouds. Let's imagine Varys, with his stance on magic and his stance on human beings in general, getting this information from Taina. Let's just picture that. It's like, so actually, Varys, I found something out, man. This is wild. Yeah, so we know how we knew she was paranoid. We knew how she was a little off kilter. All this time, she's had a prophecy driving her all this time since she was like 10, man, or 7 or however old she was. Yeah, 10. She's been thinking about that. It's crazy. It's amazing, right? And Varys is unlikely to have even suspected the slightest bit of that since Cersei never spoke of it, even to Jaime or to anyone. So he couldn't have overheard it. There's no clues. So this is mind-blowing for us. But for Varys, think about it from his perspective. He's like, what? A prophecy has been driving her actions. That's what? And from his perspective, too, he's going to be like, okay, so Cersei, prophecy. In the north, there's some prophecy stuff going on up there, too. Now, Dany comes in, and there's prophecies around her, too. Like, what's an anti-magic guy to do? Everyone's driven by prophecies. So, and a bigger question is, besides his reaction, which I wish we got to see that, because that would be almost comedic, potentially. Like, wait, what? She thinks what? What's he going to do? What is Varys going to do with this information? How is he going to manipulate her now that he knows this great secret? It's not hard to stoke her fears as is, but now he specifically knows what's driving them. He can be even more subtle about it. You think leaving a gold coin beneath Rugen's toilet was subtle as a way to implicate the Tyrells? Well, we haven't seen the worst of Varys yet. So another example of it can always get worse, right? And this is another one. So interesting. Joe points out the mirroring of singers here. I pointed that out at the beginning of the episode as one of the like patterns here is the singers, but it's very specific for Jaime and Cersei because it's back-to-back chapters and how they come in so crucially here. The chapter closes with everything going really Cersei's way. Tommen, he's happy with his kittens and his mother seeing him. It gives us slight mixed feelings as it's like, Cersei, you're so awful. And then you see her son and you're like, dang it, he doesn't deserve any of this. He's a sweet kid with honey and kittens. I mean, it's the suffering because you want Cersei to answer for her crimes, but there's almost no way for her to answer for her crimes without Tommen suffering as well. And that's no fun at all. Cersei's scheme to destroy Marjorie, Nina reminds us, is inspired by the Tower of Nestle affair, which is described quite well in The Accursed Kings, which again comes up as a major influence on George R. R. Martin. Both involve a queen and her cousins, in this case Marguerite of Burgundy, Queen of Navarre, and her two cousins Jeanne and Blanche of Burgundy, both accused of having extramarital affairs and guarding each other's affairs. Which, like a group of them all having affairs and concealing it from each other. They all kind of would go meet together. The girls would all gather and meet the men and as a group in secret, things like that until they were all caught. And some of them were there but not participating but witnessing. So you have Alla is like Jean of Burgundy here because Jean wasn't meeting a lover, but she was witness to this whole thing. So anyway. Good to know that. Another reason to read Accursed Kings. Really, really good series, y'all. It even says, this is the real Game of Thrones on the cover. Quote, George R. Martin. So, rousing endorsement from the man. So, Nina with another great take here. Something I thought about as well. A couple of the rest of y'all weighed in on this, but I think Nina's version of it is the one I'm going to go with. She wrote that it's sad, too. You go from feeling angry at Cersei to almost violently angry to feeling a little sad because of Tommen to feeling sad for just women in general, given what happens with Osney. Now, she was going to sleep with him anyway, so it's not like as bad as it could be by any means. But this is very much like what she had to do with Robert when she was married to him. Basically, kind of be what he wanted, give him sex to protect her children. And so it's almost like even as a queen, even with all this power, she has to give in to this. She has to do this kind of thing to protect her child and herself. And that is a deep cutting theme that hits on a lot of different realities and fictional realities. So Really important to acknowledge that as well. And it's a contrast, too, to Jaime thinking... It makes Jaime's thoughts really even more difficult, worse, really, because he thinks of Cersei as the queen of whores for cheating on him, and that is so wrong. It's for one thing, it's not voluntary in the sense here. She's trading sex in the almost desperately to save her child and herself, but this is nothing like a sex worker taking on a client, right? This is much more forced and dark, and just unfair for Jaime to think of her that way. Cheating on a person doesn't make you a whore. That is completely off kilter, but that is certainly reflective of the way society values things, Westerosi society in particular here, and to a lesser extent our own. So it's very telling the way this contrast, this underlying theme of sexuality and how these men view it, and how Cersei, even with all her power, even she is sort of a victim to it. In part because she's not aware of it. She is very much, well, she's, as we've covered, she's a misogynist too. Okay, from Ainsley Mecklejohn, a coffee sticker. Thanks very much. Got my coffee right here. Hope y'all are enjoying a beverage of some kind, coffee or alcohol or whatever you like here during Valar Rereadis. Also, a super chat from Aegon the Sixth. You two are great. Thank you very much. Much appreciation for the financial support. That's great. Love the name too, Aegon the Sixth. Also fun to note these Jaime and Cersei chapters as a pairing. They're only 20 seconds in difference in length too. How about that? Another example of why Cersei probably does know about Loras' sexuality. I wasn't sure about that before, but I think it's pretty clear that she does know now. She was like, you can't blame Loras. You can't implicate Loras in all this, because anyone who knows him would find that ludicrous. So she's at least got the sense to not lie about the gay man sleeping around with lots of women. Like, yeah, that lie's not going to fly for most people in the know. So, yeah, so that does seem like some of the strongest evidence yet that Cersei does know about Loras' sexuality. Stefan B. points out, too, more evidence that Tyne is not working for the Tyrells. It doesn't necessarily prove she's working for Varys, but it does throw more cold water on the idea that it's the Tyrells she's with, because if Tyne was helping Marjorie, she would have warned her right away about this Moon Tea thing. About what happened with Pycelle and the confrontation there. But instead, well, there seems to be no message passed on of any kind. And so this does seem to, again, look like that tightrope walk I mentioned briefly before. Appease the Tyrells while setting up the return of young Griff. And that's it for Cersei 9. Onwards to the Princess in the Tower. The one with vengeance, justice, fire, and blood, a.k.a. the Tower of Joyless. Joe noticed this is the longest of any Dornish or Ironborn chapter in the whole book, longer than the King's Mood or the Queenmaker. Pretty surprising. In fact, this is the 4th longest chapter in the whole book. Almost 3rd, because it's really close to being the same length as Brienne 4, which is the next longest. Joe says it's only 40 words different. And I think that's intentional on George's part. Of course, he has some control over how long his chapters are. Sometimes they just get big because he has a lot to say. But I feel like there's some lulling in this one, some intentional lulling to set up the surprise at the end. All of Ariane's time of wasting away and like, when's my dad coming, and looking at the books and trying to work with the servants. It does remind me of the Purple Wedding, where there's this endless list of foods and events that are happening as parts of the wedding that really don't have much bearing on anything, except to maybe get us a little more relaxed so that the surprise hits really hard at the end, which certainly that's what happens in the Purple Wedding. So yeah, I think that's what's happening here. Though Ariane's crowning plot was foiled, clearly there are still active reverberations and subplots born from it that are still ongoing, some barely begun. This is the pivot from her early arc, where first-timers get a huge reveal or two and a lot of excitement, but on reread, it looks a lot different. it's kind of like what I was just saying with Cersei, where Cersei's chapter, it really looks like her downfall, but rereaders know better that it's just a setback, that she's going to rise even higher for a time. Same here. Strong element of excitement still, even on reread, but it loses a lot of the confidence behind it because we know Doran's like fire, justice, vengeance, all that. A lot of that's going to go awry. It's not going to play out the way he wants, so it loses some of its power because we know it's not going to go that well. Which is, so we really do have an entirely different way of looking at this chapter now, given we know some of the failures that are going to come. But not everything's going to fail, though, so it's not a total failure. And so let's go through it. The first line is,
hers was a gentle prison.
Indeed. It kicks off a batch of chapters where captivity becomes more common. One could arguably say a gentle prison is about right for Sansa, but that's not new for her. She's been in a gentle prison since she first got to King's Landing. She just switched prisons at the beginning of this book. But for everyone else, look at this. Brienne's about to wake up in captivity. Cersei's about to be taken by the Faith. And now in other arcs, look around. Until the spoiler chapters, we won't see it, but we know already that Aeron is in captivity. He was captured right after the Kingsmoot. In A Dance with Dragons, where are we going to start with Theon? In a dungeon. His sister Asha, soon enough, she's going to be captured too, right? Ditto Davos. Even Tyrion's going to be a slave for a little while. Daenerys might be too, because she's facing a bunch of Dothraki at the end of A Dance with Dragons with only Drogon around. And the TV show kind of indicates that captivity is not unlikely. And, of course, Jaime is going to be captured by the Brotherhood, meaning the same ones who just took Brienne. And indeed, compared to all those captivity, arguably Arianne's is the gentlest, the gentle prison, right? But that's what happens when you're imprisoned by your own father and your father runs the country and you're heir to his seat, even though you think you've been removed from that seat.
I really liked, I think it was John Hagee who pointed out just how relatable this chapter is to a lot of us right now. What with lockdown, quarantine.
Oh, yeah.
With the days just kind of bleeding into one another that we can read here.
That's a good point.
Yeah, we're all in this boat.
It's a very good point. Yeah. I just want to find out what happens. I want to talk to my friends. So there's a other great irony here. Some parallel work between the Martell kids. Trystane is left out for now, but both Arianne and Quentyn have disastrous side plots, so maybe Trystane, it's good for him that he's left out. Cersei does plan to have him killed, so there's that, but Doran knows about that too, so hopefully he'll avoid that fate. That, of course, is a major piece of general insight delivered by this chapter. Even as he seems to be doing very little, Doran Martell is quite a lot more knowledgeable and active behind the scenes. Though it's clear Arianne is naive and misguided in trying to crown Myrcella, and one can really see why she's got some of the wrong impressions, right? These revelations about Doran's greater breadth of knowledge and plots are exciting, and probably meant, again, to be compared to Wyman Manderly's reveal to Davos, not unlike how we went over that with other plots. But that plan seems a lot more likely to bear fruit, meaning Wyman's plan looks more likely to succeed. We've already seen parts of it work. Freys have already been eaten. Davos has already agreed to go help get Rickon. But Doran Martell, yeah, look at this great and powerful final line here, or near final line.
Your brother went with Cletus Ironwood, Maester Kedry, and 3 of Lord Ironwood's best young knights on a long and perilous voyage, with an uncertain welcome at its end. He is gone to bring us back our heart's desire. She narrowed her eyes.
What is our heart's desire?
Vengeance. His voice was soft, as if he were afraid that someone might be listening. Justice. Prince Doran pressed the onyx dragon into her palm with his swollen, gouty fingers and whispered, "Fire and blood."
Quentyn got the fire part for sure, and it did come from a dragon. I don't know about the rest, though. When he offered to marry Dany, uncertain welcome, yeah, I don't... That's a fact, but we probably didn't imagine, most of us, that his welcome would be getting laughed at by Daario and not stopping, even when Dany's like, "Stop laughing." And he's like, "No, I'm going to keep laughing." Even minus Dario's mockery, though, it is a little ridiculous As Tyrion pointed out to young Griff, going to her as a beggar is sure to fail. She's a conqueror, but also a rescuer. Yeah. So the Onyx Dragon, though, the Syvass piece, this is a symbol of the Blackfires, too. The Targaryens are the red dragons. The Blackfires are the black. We just went over this in Brienne 6 with the story of the Clanking Dragon. It has been a lot to set this up and to make these color schemes very distinct and plain and telling. George isn't going to slip up and make a red dragon black or a black dragon red when it needs to be the other. And this fits awfully well, since from here, while it looks to a first-time reader like, oh, the Martells are going to team up with Dany again, rereaders know better. Arianne's going to go on in the Winds of Winter chapters to go try to negotiate with young Griff, Aegon, and the Golden Company and all that, while bringing along some interesting companions. And they also go to an ancient cave while finding out her brother was burned to death. So, yeah, anyway, all this put together, or going to find out when, I can't remember exactly when she finds that out, but it doesn't matter. The point is, she's going to find out, Doran's going to find out, and these things are going to conspire to make Dany more likely an enemy than an ally, finding out that, she killed their brother, and that this Aegon guy is around instead, and he's the one they're related to. Yeah, that's Elia's son, supposedly. So it really looks like they're going to be Blackfire backers, and that's why this Onyx Dragon piece is so important. A lot of people out there, self-included, think it's entirely likely or at least possible for Arianne to marry young Griff Aegon. Interestingly, Tyrion also picks up a white dragon piece in one of his The Winds of Winter chapters. Consider what that says about where his story may go. Now, white dragons aren't really a thing other than thinking about Bloodraven and Albino Dragon. That dragon had a little blood on it, the piece that he picked up. Maybe it's meant to be neutral. After all, Makoro has this vision of Tyrion being in between the dragons, dragons roaring all around him, all that. So maybe he's negotiates between the two factions or leads one into war against the other. It's not clear at all. But I just wanted to draw that to your attention because it's not the only time a dragon piece is picked up and seems to be pretty symbolic. Both the Manderley and Martell revenge/justice reveals are built on a similar foundation, restoring a rightful house to their crown and calling murderers to account. But there's at least one huge difference. Wyman is reacting/responding to very recent events when he does it. And sure, Oberyn just died, but Oberyn was a casualty as part of getting justice for Elia. Her death was long ago. That's the point. There is no justice anymore for Elia. Tywin is dead. He's the guilty one. The other guilty parties, the Mountain, not really available to punish, depending on your philosophical definitions of life, I suppose, but not really. Yeah. You can't really punish that guy and call that justice. Amory Lorch, certainly dead, same deal. Even if his corpse isn't walking around, there's still no way to punish either of them. So there is no justice to be delivered. It's only revenge at this point. It can only be to family members who didn't take part, like Tommen, like Myrcella, right? After so long, the festering grievance of the Martells is beyond Doran's planning right now. If he had taken care of revenge and justice back in the day, his descendants wouldn't feel like they have to do it. I'm not saying that they're justified in doing it. I'm describing what's happening without weighing in on the justifications. Because the revenge arc emanating from Dorne is out of Doran's control now. The people following Wyman Manderley are with him. They don't have their own agenda. They're like, yeah, get the Freys, get the Boltons, bring back Rickon. As far as we know, they're pretty united on that. They've got enemies, but they're not in their own camp. Wyman has plenty to account for, but he's got no sand snakes hanging around with the daggers at his back, potentially. There's signs of Doran's flawed approach early on, too. Things that we don't necessarily see from Wyman. After all, he blames himself for allowing Arianne's plan to get as far as it did, and that's not just taking responsibility, being generous to do so. He really did make a mistake there. George is showing us with this character that careful, cautious, doesn't mean accurate, doesn't mean great, doesn't mean right, doesn't mean correct. It just means careful and cautious. It doesn't have to mean anything more than that. You can be cautiously sloppy. It might turn out to be something like this. Arianne goes from sloppy to skilled by learning, while her father looks sloppy to actually turn out to be kind of skilled, but actually not really either, kind of more in the middle. Doran's a bit sloppy, but also somewhat skilled. So maybe one of the good things he's doing here is investing in Arianne, but he didn't do that early in her life. We'll get more on that in a minute. She's extremely, though not completely unique among POVs, in that being absent from TV show was frustrating at the time, but a good thing now. We have a lot more mystery surrounding her because we don't know what's going to happen, and I could definitely call that more than a silver lining. She spends a lot of time on her approach, as in how to play this role of facing her father, managing the situation, the strategy, how to talk to him, whether she should demur, whether she should be aggressive, what to wear, just a lot of these things. This is really important because this is going to be her life for a while, or at least a big part of it, which is that Stormlands, King's Landing, court life in general, navigating a variety of personalities and ambitions, sellswords, nobles, everything in between. The way she speaks and carries herself is going to be paramount. So that's really, really important. And is she going to still be a sister tight with the Sand Snakes no matter what they do? Or is she going to stay loyal to her father if they turn? It's a tough choice. We'll have to see. And that's part of why the mystery of not having TV reveals is a bonus. So comparisons to Sansa pop up here too. Learning how to present yourself, learning to tell people what they need to hear to get what you want. Things like that. Very strong parallels. Same with Cersei as well, but there's very different personalities in line there. Cersei's more about creating the narrative rather than playing along with it. But it still shows the same type of difficulties that they have to navigate through as ruling women. Especially because they all are attractive as well and have to deal with men coming at them for a variety of reasons. So I actually do kind of think of Arianne along the lines as potentially a young type of Taina Merryweather, meaning they even look similar, right? Dark hair, seductive, etc., olive skin, whatever, powerful. But Taina is more experienced with this sort of thing, maybe more talent for it. I'm not sure, but who knows? But Arianne is maybe going along a similar path in that she might play a Taina type role to Aegon the Sixth, something like that. We're getting a lot of clues to what type of person she's becoming. Unlike Cersei, even a little unlike Sansa, but not that Sansa and Cersei are similar in this regard. She's got more concern for other people, perhaps because she's made this huge mistake. Sansa hasn't made a huge mistake like this. Sansa hasn't sent people off to their deaths, whereas Arianne just has. She feels legitimate guilt over Aerys Oakheart. She still kind of abuses the servants here in this chapter by trying to get them to do things for her and running past them, just being kind of rude, things like that, things that they don't have any control over the situation. She dumped wine on one of them. It's like, what good's that going to do? Like, really? Like, oh, you poured wine on the servant? Okay, I'll come talk to you now. Like, it's just pointless. So there is still some princess, some rich kid in her, spoiled kid in her. But you can see that some of that's turning. And of course, it's a bit late to take responsibility for Aerys Oakheart and other things, but it is not too late entirely because, well, again, like Cersei, she's got so much privilege that she can screw up this badly and still get another chance. And of course, in this case, it's her own father giving her a second chance, which that's not so strange. But still, it's a grand failure of intrigue, capture, and imprisonment, followed by a second chance. They even both slept with a Kingsguard. Well, multiple in Cersei's case. But from there, the difference is huge, right? While Cersei sends Synel to Qyburn on a whim almost, Arianne shows concern for Cedra, who almost certainly wasn't facing anything like Synel, this is the one she manipulated into taking a message to Garen, which obviously didn't actually happen. So it's a big difference in how, and if we compare that to Sansa, who's more like taking charge. She's not rude to people. She's just, a leader. But she's not super concerned for them either. Not unconcerned, but maybe not super aware of it. But that's part of her youth, I think, as well. So I don't actually have anything new to add from our earlier analysis on who told. Our story hasn't changed on that, so I recommend going back to Ariane's first chapter if you're curious in that regard. But I do have a new recommendation. Friends of the show, Julie A. and Amy Blackfire, put together some more thoughts on who told. They have a new idea. And the blog post, I can't really read. You won't be able to understand it. So just go to our Facebook group if you want to check it out, and you'll find a link to it there. Or if you already know Amy's blog, you can find it there. So Doran won't tell her who told, and that's a bit frustrating. At least he's teaching her ruling-related skills and ways of thinking, which, from her recollection of her upbringing, he was lax on. This is a major, major criticism of Doran Martell. It sounds like he may have leaned too far into making it look like she was going to be married off. Like, that's what she thought. She thought she was going to be married off to some old guy and not ruling Dorne. And apparently he leaned into that too much by not teaching her how to rule. Because she resents that a lot. She resents being taught other things while it appeared that her younger brother was getting the education, the ruling education. Check out this quote for more evidence of that. Prince Oberyn had armed each of his daughters so that they never need be defenseless, but Arianne Martell had no weapon but her guile. This is that same frustration. She's angry that her father didn't teach her more. And I feel that. Partly because I never met my own father. But from more in the story, non-personal point of view, she's very motivated by her father's shortcomings. Thinking, look, he didn't teach me how to do this. He should have taught me how to rule better. If I screwed up this crowning Myrcella plot, a lot of the things you're telling me now, if you had told me them before, I probably wouldn't have done this. I definitely missed some things. I definitely missed some angles. I definitely missed some details. I definitely didn't get that you were hiding all this. And his reasoning is, you've always been a gossiper. You'll just go tell Tyene, which, by the way, is a big part of why Tyene is not unlikely to be the one that told about this whole thing. But setting that aside, that's the wrong reason, Doran. Yes, you don't want her spilling your secrets, but that's an opportunity to teach. Teach your daughter why you don't spill those secrets. How's she ever going to be a good ruler if you don't teach her that? Like, you still planned on her ruling after Viserys died. You still planned on her being a queen when Viserys was alive. Was she just going to sit there and be a dumb queen because she wasn't educated? Is that really what your plan was? Fair to criticize Doran's upbringing of Arianne here, and he seems to agree with some of the criticisms, to be fair to him. And he does also, though he gets it wrong, point out that, no, if anyone should be angry, it's Quentyn. No, I disagree. I think they should both be. Why does only one person get to be angry? That's a strange framing. Like, if anyone should be angry, it's like, no, multiple people can be angry. It's funny framing there, Doran. It's not really fair, is it? So, but it is true. Quentyn does have reason to be upset. He was also, like Arianne, very unprepared for the task he was sent to do. So, again, his education and upbringing are very questionable, and that's definitely on the parent, not the child. Yeah. Okay. So, that's another really important thing about the way this chapter ends. Yes, Arianne's like, oh, okay, so I am gonna be Princess of Dorne. But she still doesn't love the idea of being subordinate to her brother, which is still gonna be the case if he's gonna be the king. She's Princess of Dorne. So it's like, well, either way, he's gonna be above me. But it's definitely more fair. It's rather than her being a nobody and him being Prince of Dorne, she still, gets her birthright. So she doesn't necessarily love the idea of kneeling to him, but it doesn't really matter since he's not going to be there to be knelt to.
Yeah, I think if she probably had to choose, she'd probably choose him alive and her king than dead.
Yeah, she's not Cersei. She's not like, I want all my enemies dead no matter what. Like, so let's also go through a few important potentially important characters that might pop up later, houses of interest. Arianne thinks of the Ullers, for example. Another big question mark on the show. Ilaria is extremely violent and bent on revenge. Book Ilaria is the extreme opposite, not just peaceful, but an advocate for ending the revenge cycle. But the Ullers, the house she's from, do have more of the reputation of the former. Typically, the Ullers are of the violent and dangerous type. Their motto is given in this chapter: half the Ullers are mad, the other half are... Well, that's not their motto. That's like a thing people say about them, but it is a common saying about them, like Lannisters always pay their debts. It's not actually the official house motto. Things like that. So they built their seat long ago aside a river that seems to be sulfurous and contributes to the stories told about them. After all, sulfur is not good for the mental health or for the body.
Or the senses.
Yeah, for any of the
I actually
senses.
like the smell of sulfur, like, hot springs. But no, I'm picturing, by the way, the Uller sigil. It's just split in half, and half says mad, and the other half says worse.
That's a great idea. I need that sigil so bad now. Lord Hallman, she also thinks how Lord Harmon Uller would be upset about the imprisoning of the Sand Snakes, because those are his kin. Some of them are his grandkids. Ilaria's, obviously, because Ilaria is her father. Also, the Ullers are the ones that killed Meraxes and Queen Rhaenys back during Aegon's conquest, or during the attempted conquest of Dorne. So, history repeating itself? I don't know. Maybe. Watch out for those Ullers is all I'm saying. Watch out. Dorian also mentions Volantis. He does so after picking up an elephant Syvas piece. This is a double meaning, part of the Blackfire connection, perhaps, since the Golden Company has elephants, but it's also one of the two Volantine political parties. We hear that the other one is the Tigers. We hear mentioned that the elephants have stripes now, which is a way of saying that even the elephants are warlike, because the Tigers are the warlike party. It's a way of saying the elephants are being kind of like the Tigers. So it's a casual reference. He talks about how the Volantines are very subtle, and I don't think an elephant is any match for a dragon. And Dany will be doing the blunt, non-subterfuge approach that we described with Cersei. Certainly that's what happens on TV, right? Dany starts listening to her advisors. It doesn't go very well. She's like, screw this, going straight for the throat. And that starts working for a while, and she keeps going with that. So this theme is certainly a present, and it might even be present here as well. But Doran is never very likely to take such a direct approach. But if he dies, if other people, if he's out of the way, Dorne may look a lot different. So I do wonder as well about Dany and Volantis, and with the slave trade and ancient social power structures and all that, and how she's going to deal with that. I feel like she may just deal with it directly. She's like, I don't want to deal with another Game of Thrones in another city like she dealt with Meereen. Screw this. Dracarys. Burn the slavers. There's no negotiating with these people. And interestingly, it's this anecdote about Volantis is accompanied by this quote from Hotah.
I remember, echoed Areo Hotah in his deep voice. The bears danced and the bells rang, and the prince wore red and gold and orange. My lady asked me who it was who shone so bright.
Now that's Norvos, not Volantis. And of course, Milario, Arianne's mother, Doran's wife, has gone back there after their divorce. And I've always wondered if there was something more to it, if it wasn't somehow part of their long-term planning, their plotting. But it might not be. It might just be Norvos is just part of the world building, and we're never going to go there. But we might get some imagery from Hotah's memories, since he is going to have at least one more chapter, I suppose. And he is from there. So the Syvas table, of course, is a big part of the chapter as a symbol of the Game of Thrones itself, showing how you really need to understand how to play before you try playing. You can't just dive right into it. It's also it's there apart from its other reasons to foreshadow the Blackfires and to falsely foreshadow the connection to Daenerys and all that. And here is a different angle on Doran's personality, something that, well, he again deserves part of the blame for this, but it's a good point.
She was my ward, Arianne, betrothed to your own brother and under my protection. You have dishonored all of us.
So she was trying to play the Game of Thrones. So this is why the Sivas table is part of this discussion. By crowning, it was almost like checkers, though. She's trying to get a queen to the other side of the board, crown it, and then profit. And once you have the queen, you win. Because in checkers, queens are even more powerful than they are in chess, even though they're also the most powerful piece in chess. But he really does seem to care about children. I think this really does bother him. Joe writes that you get the sense this is one of the things that angers Doran the most. Whatever conflicts the adults might have, the children should not be included, which is sad for him too. It's very ominous because you get the sense that he doesn't want to necessarily kill Tommen either, but the Sand Snakes do. Other people in Doran do. This is what I was saying before about how this need for revenge is festered for so long that it's out of his control now. It's going to go in ways that, like, he wants to do this gentle, sort of gentlemanly revenge where only the perpetrators are damaged. Where normally when these houses get involved in revenge arcs, it's just blood upon blood. It's like Blackwood Bracken, where it just goes back and forth and everyone's guilty according to them, to the other side. There is no innocence in this. Doran wants to have like a Geneva Convention situation where the children are left out of it, but that's extremely unrealistic. It's always how it gets escalated. Everyone knows the children are precious, and if you can threaten something precious, then you can get an advantage. And it's a similar concept to Victarion being limited by society's rules, whereas Euron is not limited by them. He just has more options. He's going to win because he's not just because he's smarter, but because he's got more options. The game, he can make moves on the board that others can't because he's not playing by the same rules. And that's the same thing here. Doran expects people to play by some of these rules. He expects some of these things to go a certain way. He expects his daughter to behave a certain way, all these other things, and he's wrong about a lot of them. He's right about some of them too. You can't just dismiss it all either. It's a very complicated character. He's very, very gray, but gray in a different way, because he's not gray in his morality so much. Well, he is, but he is more gray in terms of his skills. He's mixed bag for sure. And you just don't see a lot of that, where people have the justice of their cause is pretty straightforward in literature, but they don't have the ability to see it through. That's not that common. Usually it's like the plucky person looking for justice gets it, right? They stand up to the more powerful figure and they win, and we cheer them. But that doesn't seem like that's in the cards for Doran. It does seem, too, that looking ahead a little bit, that Arianne gets on board with this, even though we don't get her point of view in A Dance with Dragons. We get Hotah's, and it looks like she's fully backing her father. And then we get to her chapters in The Winds of Winter. It does seem like she's, I don't want to say bought in, because it sounds like she's been sold something that she shouldn't have bought. But she is loyal and understands things that she didn't understand before. And that's a really big deal. Nina points out the intelligence of Arianne here. Yes, there's naivete for sure, but she's very observant, and it's just a matter of her learning how to make better use of her observational skills. There's a lot of examples of her taking note of her surroundings, thinking through the different things that happen with different people, trying to figure out who told, thinking about the way the servants operate, figuring out where the weaknesses lie. It's her inexperience prevents a lot of these things from working, but the idea is the observations are clever. So there's something to build on there for sure. It's also a very underlying theme too. The waiting has another purpose to it. Arianne was impatient. Doran perhaps is too patient, but that is one of the themes here. By making her wait, he's teaching her the value of that patience. Use this time wisely. She has all that time to think, and she wastes some of it. I mean, she definitely should have been reading some of those books. We really wanted her to, too. But that is an implied lesson here that's very important and maybe kind of easy to miss. Still kind of confused over why Doran thinks Darkstar is so dangerous. Perhaps because of his intents, perhaps because of what he's willing to do. Not necessarily because he's such a great warrior or a great leader, but because he has this dangerous lack of honor, this dangerous ability to ruin some of these traditions that we talked about. Like if Darkstar is willing to throw his whole country into a war for himself, for his own ambitions, well, what else might he do? This is not a guy restrained by any sense of compassion or goodwill towards others. And that by itself makes him dangerous. On the other hand, how is this guy who failed to kill an unarmed preteen girl so dangerous? That's a fair point as well. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with Darkstar. J17 says, I'd like to know what color dragon was in that puppet show that killed the lions. Oh, yeah, good question. I don't know that we have that. Yeah, good question. I kind of feel like it was black, but I don't remember that. Dornish James says, isn't Bloodraven's personal sigil a white dragon? Yes, I did mention that. I don't know that it could. The way we could maybe draw a line from Tyrion seeing a white dragon to Bloodraven is that, well, by the end of the TV show, Tyrion is Bran's advocate. He's like his main advocate for like, well, this is the guy that should be leading us. And that's kind of indirectly Bloodraven, but it's kind of hard for me to see how Bloodraven could be involved in that directly. Although if we see him, if we see the Golden Company involved, that was an enemy of his. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I think it may also refer to a specific dragon, Viserion, who is not white, but pale cream colored, kind of close to white, the closest to being white of any of them. So, definitely more to think about there. That dragon, as usual, George throws multiple symbols at once, so we can't be sure which, if any, or all apply. He's clever that way. So Arianne just goes past the books, unfortunately, like I said. A huge tome about dragons that somehow made them as interesting as Newt. She's like, no, well, give me all the Newt info then, if that's what you think. Easy to brush over the fact that she sees a copy of the Seven-Pointed Star and quote the Lives of High Septons. The Lives of High Septons. That's the book in the show that Gilly was looking at when she found out that Rhaegar married Lyanna. That's the actual book. The one that had details of like the guy's daily routine and walking upstairs and things like that. That's that book. I mean, it may not be meant to be the same book. The TV show may have changed that, but that was like, I did not catch that the last time I read this book. It's like, wait, that's the book Gilly was reading. So that could really matter. And the Seven-Pointed Star itself, well, Arianne's about to be probably neck deep in dealing with sparrows in the faith like half of Westeros will be, especially if she marries the new king, right? So there'll be lots of reason for her to understand the laws and guidelines of the faithful, if even if it's just to keep up, but also perhaps to undermine them, to argue against the High Sparrow. Like the High Sparrow could bring up all these points. The Seven-Pointed Star says this. Seven-Pointed Star says that. It would really help if there was someone that could kind of argue those points back and say, actually, it says this, or in another passage, it says this. Like to debate a Bible scholar, it can pay to have a Bible scholar. No one aligned against the High Sparrow seems to have that skill that we know of yet, and that could come into play. A third book mentioned is a book on Dornish law. Even that could have relevance because, well, Dornish laws of succession are different, things like that. Obviously, they were trying to crown Myrcella because of their laws, and it goes a certain way. This could matter for inheritance somehow. Of the three books, it seems the least likely to be relevant, but it's a book that has a description, so we're going to talk about it. Yeah. So, yeah, it's actually funny. We talked about comparing Sansa to Arianne, but she's almost Sweetrobin-ish to the servants a little bit. The way I remember Sweetrobin throws like oatmeal on the maester, and she dumps wine on one of the servants too. It's like that's not a good look, Arianne.
Yeah, I know. It's like one of those things where you really should be judging people on how they treat those underneath them.
Yeah.
And Ariane, yeah, she doesn't look very good here, but I like to think that she is just genuinely very upset and trapped.
Yeah. And before you can learn to think about the even less helpless people, she has to think of the people in the middle, because she wasn't thinking of anybody before. She was only thinking of the nobility and herself. She starts in this chapter, she's like, okay, well, I'm responsible for what happened to Ares Oakhart. So maybe that leads to her also thinking about servants in that line of like that should eventually the umbrella should extend to them. But I guess she's just not there yet. Hopefully she gets there. Tree Girl says, Martells always seem to be shooting themselves in the foot. It seems to be a theme with the family. Even Trystane doesn't shoot himself in the foot, but he's shown to not be anything special by losing to Myrcella at Syvas. Maybe that's more to show that Myrcella is intelligent, but it doesn't help our impression of Trystane. It doesn't make us think less of him either, but she notices how it just seems to be a pattern, lots of failure from this group of Martells. Like they have decent ideas, but they just do something wrong. Like Oberyn going after, like it was pretty clever for him to stand as Tyrion's champion and to use poison, and it looked like it was all going to work until the big oops. And then Quentin Martell, like, why do the dragon thing? Like that didn't seem like a very good idea. So. And then Ariane, obviously made several mistakes in her plans as well. Doran made mistakes in his plans. So there's just, maybe that is a pattern, and maybe that doesn't bode well for the Martells in the long run. If they're going to team up with young Griff, that's probably not the right team to hitch your star to. Hopefully that doesn't ruin them and they get a chance to switch sides again. We'll see. Another quote that is of note here, the last one we'll take a look at here, is the line, Sorella was always pushing in where she didn't belong. I suppose that's meant to be another clue to the body of evidence that Sorella is Alaris the Sphinx at the Citadel,
and that she's nosy.
Yeah, and she's nosy. She's just always trying to learn things. Very curious, apparently, which
we know. I mean, she's at the old town, and we've heard about other things like her looking at specimens.
It's not the best thought from Ariane either. This is along the line of her how she treats the servants. It's like this is not a flattering thought for her to have it, thinking of Sorella that way when this is how she treats someone who's curious. I mean, maybe Sorella was being nosy about things, but
if you think about it as in someone who if you grew up with other people
sort of like
around
a sister,
your
not
age,
technically,
it's your sisters, and Tyene and Ariane are of an age, they were close, and Sorella's always just trying to push in and tag along, and she's younger. They don't want her around. Same reason why Nymeria probably, often was like, no, I don't want you and Tyene around, and she hung out with the Fowler twins. At that age, there's a big difference of 1 and 2 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Between a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Yeah, we talked about how Bloodraven was a little bit too young to be training with Daemon and Bittersteel and the rest, and how that may have been part of why his attitude developed the way it was. Yeah. Perhaps Sorella was a little bit kept out of things, and that's part of her development. All right, let's get to Alayne 2. Sweetsleep for Sweetrobin, a.k.a. the gang meets Randa Royce. I should have said the gang Randa Royce meets, because then it would be GRRM. It's a goodbye to the Eyrie, maybe for good, maybe not. It's hard to say whether we'll ever come back here. Alayne's second chapter, and the second longest chapter in all of A Song of Ice and Fire thus far. A few new characters, some sneaky setup for future plots, some of which involves the deaths of certain other characters. 2 of them, in fact, so lots of 2s going on here. The first line is,
she turned the iron ring and pushed the door open, just a crack.
We open when nearly everyone has already gone. A skeleton crew remains to take care of Sansa and Robin, but they'll all be headed down too. Robert is in peak brat mode. Sansa is learning how to deal with that. She's gotten pretty good at it. Playing roles, right? Being someone she's not for a child, that's really common, right? Pretending that, oh, Robert, you're so brave, I need you to help me get through this, as a way to make him brave when they're crossing the mountains. Or, I'll give you the stories you want to hear, or we can do all these things. Basically, she's doing whatever it takes to get this very stubborn child to do what needs to be done. And we're also seeing that her natural leadership qualities are coming out. It's the first time we really see her in charge. Though we've seen her be in a leadership role before, perhaps most notably in the Sept during the Battle of the Blackwater. That was really important. And this is maybe the first time since that she's had time to draw on those abilities. And that is, she is a natural leader, and it was foreshadowed very early on that she's good at running a household. It was said, like, I think it was, I can't remember if it's Arya or Sansa's chapter where they talk about how she was really good at all these things except math. Basically, all the things about running a household, Sansa excelled at except math. And well, we see it here. She's really good at all these things. The servants are kind of looking to her for advice. She backs down a noble on an issue of domestic concern, showing her taking authority and things like that. So it's pretty cool to see that. It definitely foreshadows greater leadership roles for her later. She's progressing on that line of progression, evolving, so to speak. And for the second chapter in a row, we get wind of a secret marriage plan, right? We got Viserys Arianne. Now we have Aery the Heir and Sansa. In both cases, the hidden husband is a goner. Aery the Heir is not dead, but it's certainly implied that he will be, because do you really think Littlefinger is marrying Sansa off to him for good, given how he's constantly creepy with her in every chapter, doing things like pulling her into his lap, about talking about how dutiful her kisses are and how they need to be more like not dutiful. Anyway, it's very clear that Littlefinger is going to get rid of Harry the Heir someday if he has his way, just like he's planning on getting rid of Sweetrobin, which he just flat out says when Robert dies, blah, blah, blah. He's not being terribly subtle about it. The only thing, again, that saves Sansa from his creepiness is his lack of presence. He's got to be off in the Vale being Littlefinger, playing roles for different lords and giving them what they want, telling them what they want to hear so that they will do his bidding. And the same is implied here for the Sweetsleep. As mentioned in Cersei 9, it was Maester Coleman who was doing the correct things to save Jon Arryn from the Tears of Lys, but Pycelle stopped him. He's doing the right thing here. He's trying to limit the amount of Sweetsleep. Sansa doesn't really fully understand it, so while she's taking more and more authority, she doesn't understand the toxicity. It's maybe kind of related to her blind spot with regards to math. I don't know, but Coleman is like, this needs to stop, but he's being forced into it. Sansa doesn't fully understand, but Sansa does understand other things more than he does. For example, there's the time when Coleman's like, are you sure it's a good idea to put him in front of all those people? He doesn't like music. And she's like, no, he does like music. He doesn't like singing. And that's a really important distinction, right? And it's just one example, but it's meant to show Sansa's level of detailed understanding, her following of the deeper nuance and not writing things off without looking closer. But I think Alayne may later understand what's happened and feel guilty in her role, even though I don't put much blame on her, if any, for this, considering she's not even an adult and Littlefinger's going to have his way one way or the other. There's only so much she could do, even if she did want to stand up for it. But yeah, I don't really put blame on her for being party to Robert's poisoning here, but she may feel responsibility for it later. How she feels later is not necessarily going to line up with her actions, because, well, she might think, I could have stopped the murder of this child, but maybe she'll just needed to be done. Who knows? But she's also, the Maester himself might get blamed for it, right? Since he's the one giving the doses, it'd be really easy for Littlefinger to be like, I don't know how it's like, why did you keep giving him Sweetsleep? I didn't tell you to do that. Like, who are they going to believe? So Marillion takes the fall for one murder, one Aaron's death, or one in-law Aaron, and maybe Maester Coleman will take the fall for Robert Arryn's, although not literally the fall, since the moon door is in the Eyrie and they've just left the Eyrie. So just like Cat, there's Alayne is witness and party to multiple murders. Now Arya is directly involved in these murders, several of them anyway. But blame isn't the point anyway. I'm not trying to blame Sansa for anything. It's just to show parallel developments in their arcs that don't necessarily look like such, because it's important for them to have things to bond over later, having common ground and things like that. Because we look towards a reuniting of Starks and how they will get along, and having shared experiences, well, not shared, but common experiences, common ground is a really big deal, because obviously Sansa and Arya were not close at the beginning. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for that to change, for them to potentially work together. Maybe they won't be like tight, but maybe they will be. I don't know. And it's interesting too that Robert even notices what's going on. He notices the taste and things like that. It's kind of like Tommen, how he's issuing orders, but no one pays any attention to his orders for the most part. He's obviously, Tommen isn't nearly as willful, but he does say, I want to sit on the throne, do things like this, and then he gets said no. And Robert's harder to say no to, but still he gets ignored a lot. They lock him in his own room. I mean, things like that. So it is still a little it is still rough seeing a child being slowly poisoned to death, though. That's not easy. And Littlefinger is just, it's hard for him to get worse, but he really has gotten worse. It's like, how could Littlefinger get worse? Like, we talked about how it can always get worse with Euron. It can always get worse with Cersei. It's true with Littlefinger too. This guy is clever. He finds new ways to make things worse. And yeah, I do feel bad for Robert. With this guy as his guardian, Robert is spoiled, but he's also 6. He's scared. His mother's been murdered. His stepfather doesn't seem to really like him. He's got terrible health. I mean, he's not. He was kind of got the short end of the stick there.
I mean, I think people forget just how young he is.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, 6.
6.
Yeah.
6 is very young.
Yeah.
Like, geez, I probably tend to think of him in my head as like, oh, he's 8 or 9. But no.
Yeah. Not even. Yeah. Now, some of this, so it's hard to go too far with looking at him now and thinking, well, he's going to be a bad adult. Like, really? I don't know if you can, maybe, like, it doesn't look good, but 6 is still too young to make that kind of judgment. 6-year-olds change their, grow into decent adults all the time. And here's another
I would
line.
go so far as to say that most 6-year-olds that suck grow into perfectly fine adults.
Probably. I guess I don't really have the numbers. But I would agree with you. Here's a quote referencing Coleman and Robert and politics.
Coleman only wanted the best. Coleman only wanted the best for his charge. Alayne knew, but what was best for Robert the boy and what was best for Lord Arryn were not always the same. Peter had said as much, and it was true. Maester Coleman cares only for the boy, though. Father and I have larger concerns. So
this is kind of a troubling line because, even Sansa thinks of him as a bit of a commodity, as well as the father and I. She's thinking, obviously, it's important for her to play the role of Alayne, but some things, just like it is with Arya, some triggers in her chapter, certain topics have her thinking of herself, meaning Sansa. Other things, she continues to keep up the role of Alayne. For example, with Arya, it was talking about the Night's Watch, hearing about Lysa being killed, things like that, things that were very much Arya's life. And here, it's somewhat similar. There's a couple of things that trigger her thinking of herself as Sansa, like the cold, thinking of that. But when she legitimately thinks of him as father, it's a little creepy. It's like, don't go too far with that, Sansa. don't be indoctrinated too much. You want him to think you believe that, but internally, we still want you to keep your individuality, your identity as Sansa. So, So what is the thing that Robert detects in his beverage? He says there's something vile in his milk, which is not Sweetsleep. We know that for 2 reasons. One, it's that Sweetsleep is sweet. It shouldn't be vile. On the other hand, taste is, subjective. But Maester Coleman says he didn't give him Sweetsleep the night before because Sansa's like, he wanted sweet milk last night. You wouldn't give it to him. And he complained about what you gave him instead, said it was vile. This is almost certainly milk of the poppy. 2 reasons for this. One is that Coleman tries to offer milk of the poppy instead in the first place. He's like, milk of the poppy instead of Sweetsleep? And she's like, nah. He has to be aware. He has to be awake. We need him muted, not asleep. And Milk of the Poppy is too much. Milk of the Poppy should be bitter. It should be bitter, which could fit as vile, given what we know about how it's made. There's alkaloids in it. Nina showed us on Facebook. She linked us to Nobody Suspects the Butterflies site, which is a great site. Lots of great analysis over there. And she did a great breakdown of Milk of the Poppy. And that's where it's pointed out that it should taste bitter. So that fits really well here.
And just to be clear, that is nobodysuspectsthebutterfly.tumblr.com.
Yeah. Check her out. She is
we've
great
got to hang out with her at Ice and FireCon too.
Yeah, we sure have. A couple times, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, real quick, Lothar Brune comes up here. He's... Maya is of interest to him, and I wonder if that's going to go anywhere. And it gives us an example of her inner thoughts when she thinks of Maya as the bastard girl. Well, she herself is playing a bastard girl as Alayne. So that's a moment where she's not thinking of herself in her role, and she's thinking of herself as Sansa. And we don't have any idea how Mia feels about Lothar. So this may not even be relevant, but certainly Mia's parentage is of interest. So anytime there's a potential for her to be in some kind of relationship and bear children, well, it's at least worthy of at least a little consideration. Though I kind of doubt Lothar is going to be an important character. We never know, because Lothar being close to Littlefinger, maybe he has reason to turn on Littlefinger. Maybe he'll end up working with Sansa. Who knows? So a recurring theme within Sansa's chapters is going along the same track her mother did. Going to the Vale is a big part of that, because Catelyn went to the Vale, right? She had to face some of the same things. She had to face Lysa. She had to face little Robert. She had to face the traveling. Although in Sansa's case, the traveling was by ship. So that's actually a pretty big difference, because she didn't have to take the high road. But notably, a lot of these times, Sansa one-ups her mother, does a better job. Not always, certainly. Certainly when it comes to knowledge and wisdom and accumulated things like that, her mother having a lot larger breadth of experience matters. But consider facing the gorge, facing the really scary sounding mule ride down the slopes. Catelyn struggled mightily with going up, and going down is probably scarier. And Sansa's cool with it. She pretends to be scared to give more courage to Robert. She acts like she's like, "Hey, I need you to hold me tighter," and etc. It's quite well done. But behind that, it's clear that Sansa's really not that bothered by it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, for one, some people are afraid of heights, some people aren't. That's an obvious aspect of things. But two, I think there is a difference in age. I think that affects things very much. That when you're younger, you have a little bit less sense of just how dangerous something is and your life. And I think Catelyn would have a little bit greater sense of that, perhaps, as one part of things.
Yeah, maybe it's easier to face that when you're younger. That's a good point.
So I would add that to it as well, but also just that Sansa's gone through a lot scarier stuff than Catelyn has to this point.
Yeah, that's true.
Catelyn hasn't actually gone through that many. I mean, I guess the attack on Bran was up there, but
yeah,
Sansa's had to steel herself more than Catelyn has.
That's true. Catelyn has certainly had most of the worst things that happened to Catelyn were after going to the Vale.
Yeah.
For example, too. So yeah. Another parallel to the last chapter. There's quite a few. The concealing Robert's frailty and cowardice, which, well, Doran's cowardice isn't exactly concealed because he seems to have that reputation, but how gouty and frail he is, that is pretty well concealed from the general populace and people outside of Doran. And it's an interesting consideration, one from an adult versus from a child. But either way, there's Westeros is full of aggressive, dangerous people that look for weakness. And when they see that weakness, they'll try to press that advantage. So it does matter keeping these things quiet. But also interesting too that, and I don't think I mentioned this back in that chapter. Another way they conceal their power is lying about their military strength. And I don't know. I don't think that's happening in the Vale. Certainly, Dorne exaggerates their numbers, and Dorne points out that even King Daeron the First exaggerated Dornish numbers, in which the Dornish were happy to borrow that lie. But in the Vale, it's somewhat the opposite. It's not as populous as, say, the Reach or the West, even potentially. Maybe it's about the same as the West. But unlike either of those regions, their numbers are almost untouched. They have perhaps the largest untapped supply of fighting men in the entire realm of Westeros put together. Every region, for the most part, has been war-torn, except for Dorne, I guess, but Dorne is less populous than the Vale. So, and also perhaps less likely to be hit by civil war soon. But on the other hand, the Vale is about to hit winter, so which Dorne is going to feel less. So we have a moment where little Robin steals a kiss from Sansa, and it sends her back to the Blackwater, thinking about a different kiss. But it's a kiss that didn't happen. So this is interesting because George has been pretty open about his mistakes in the past, and he doesn't claim this one as a mistake. He claims it as a false memory for Sansa. Now, why is he having Sansa remember Sandor kiss her when it didn't happen? I don't know. There's a lot of possible interpretations here. It's another example of a thing that the fandom is not united on. There's a lot of theories on this one. Some people just think it's a mistake that George won't cop to, which I can't say for sure that's not the case, but it's not where I lean. But it is really tricky. I mean, Cersei, we just saw Cersei having partial delusions, and maybe this is meant to be a bit of a parallel to that, but it is I don't have a strong answer for it. So maybe it's going to come up again. Maybe it's setting up something that we just have barely begun to scratch the surface of plot-wise. But of course, it's used as evidence that Sansa and Sandor will have a relationship later. Certainly it indicates that she has at least some attraction to him. So there's that. That tends to be where a lot of the discussions around this false memory go to, about speaking to her attraction to him, and vice versa potentially. But it's also interesting that it comes up now. Sandor obviously hasn't been around for a while. He's in this book. Only rereaders see his presence as thoroughly as non-rereaders. First timers don't know the Gravedigger as Sandor probably, and this whole activity around the Hound's helmet and everything has a whole different meaning. So his personality is a lot more prominent, and thinking of him as a future character when you've only read this book for the first time, well, why would you do that? You'd think he's dead.
Yeah, unless you've seen the show in the case of Sean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a very good example. We have someone like Sean who's reading the books for the first time after having seen the show.
And he's like, well, of course the Hound, he's not just dead. No, he's not in this Hound's helm. What's going on here?
Yes. His confusion was a different sort of confusion because he knows the Hound is alive because of the show. He's like, well, who is that then? Well, who's wearing the helm? Yeah. And of course the helm was only in season 1. They're just like, this helm doesn't look good on TV. They got rid of it. So it's not even a thing in the show at all, the helmet. Yeah. Important too that not only is Sansa skilled at maneuvering around Robert's personality and handling him, but she seems genuinely kind to him. She's not like a big fan of him because he's annoying, but she seems to have some value to the notion that all children, are somewhat sacred, even though this kid is a little rough. So that's a nice thing. That's a good thing. You want to see characters who are being set up for future leadership. You really want to see them have compassion. You really want to see them treat children well, even the children that are not the best. They're still children. That's the point. Bad kids don't always stay bad. Don't turn into bad adults always. We just covered that.
Yeah, if Sansa just raised Robert, he'd probably turn out pretty well.
I mean, Sansa herself is an example. Like, if you only look at first chapter Sansa, she's not. That's where a lot of people's dislike of her comes from, even though she's clearly changed since then.
Yeah, she
If you
has
had only
clearly
got that
changed.
picture of her, like, yeah.
And she had, yeah, I guess she had pretty good parents.
Yeah, I mean, well, but they didn't parent her super well in that regard, but they did parent her well in other regards because she's coming through this like she's got good values, even though
Yeah,
she
I mean,
was haughty and
yeah,
a
it's
little
hard not to
snotty,
be a
but-
little bit of a spoiled brat when you're literally the top echelon of society.
Yeah, it's true. and I mean, we see some of that even with Kat and Ned. Even Ned sometimes was ignorant about what common people's lives are like. As much
How
as
much
we like
does a banana cost?
Yeah. $9, right? A gold dragon. So yeah. She's, as much as she's sort of indoctrinated into this household idea and being Littlefinger's daughter, she's definitely still very resistant to his advances. She's trying to figure out ways around that, but he's cornering her more and more. And he does what he always does. When he wants something from someone and they're not willing to give it, he just offers them more. He just overwhelms them with, usually it's money, right? In this case, it's not money. But what does he say to her at the end? He says, "So those are your gifts from me, my sweet Sansa. Harry, the Airy, and Winterfell. That's worth another kiss now, don't you think?" That really shows what he's like, I'm going to overwhelm you with extremely valuable gifts in order to win your heart and to make you feel guilty about not showing gratitude. But there's only one thing he wants in return, and it's gross. So just picture, I mean, this is no different than like some creepy older guy just finding some young girl and just overwhelming her with presents and being like, oh, she's going to love me because I'm going to constantly make her feel good with presents. It's like, this isn't love. This isn't a real relationship in that sense. This is a transactional thing. This is buying love. This is tricking a young mind into feeling what isn't love, because, well, that's what young minds are susceptible to, that sort of to not having a distinction between love and lust and infatuation and gratitude. And that's what skeezy older men are able to capitalize on, going, well, I can skirt that blurry line between these concepts, but it's not working. Sansa's not. She's like, yeah, thanks, but I'm still not interested in you at all. But he's still going to push it. So that's eventually going to have to come to a head because he's not going to stop and she's not going to give in. At least I hope not. So it's the poison gifts concept, right? It's the same thing, more forthrightly stated by our erstwhile thick philosopher Victarion, right? He's the man that really sits down and thinks of these things in detail. He doesn't get us anywhere, but at least he raises the question, which is sometimes refreshing, because in these other chapters, these things are so subtle, you can easily miss them. So that's what's happening. The same concept of poison gifts that's what the Airy, Winterfell, Harry, and in fact, literally poisoned in the case of Harry, because he's probably going to be poisoned or get killed off in some other way, as we described at the beginning of this chapter analysis. Harry's got to go for Littlefinger to reclaim Sansa, which is clearly his goal. Very straightforward. So and this is why I was saying earlier that it's even more gross than it was. Somehow, despite all his skeezing and honing in on this very young girl, he's now added murder to it. He's like, not only am I going to, make myself, wiggle myself into your, try to make myself your man or whatever, I'm going
Wiggle.
What's that?
Wiggle. That was
Wiggle, yeah, more like force or.
Yeah, I don't like all of this conversation. Go on.
Yeah, my verbiage isn't correct, but you're getting the point. Like, he's forcing his way in, and he's including murder as part. He's like, I know she'll like me even more if I murder these other people. Like, so he's like, while extending his absconding of Sansa, he's telling her that also we're going to kill Sweetrobin and this Harry guy that you have to marry. So don't you love that? Doesn't that make you like me even more? Jeez. Again, Littlefinger shows where his weaknesses lie. He just really, as good as he is at manipulating people, he doesn't understand love. He doesn't understand how this works because he doesn't feel love himself. He's a bit of a sociopath, if not worse. So Miranda, very interesting character. Talk about a character that seems like she's going to have some importance later. Some of these other characters we think might be important. If we bring up some of these river lords, some of these other random characters here and there, some of these other lords in Dorne, maybe they're going to be important. But Miranda, front and center, pops up, starts gossiping, making interesting conversation with Sansa. And, well, Baelish warned her. He's like, look out for this one. She may seem like she's just fun and talkative and gossipy, but behind all that, she's got a clever mind. And this gossip, she's bringing it up for a reason. She wants to see what you say. She's going to check your reactions. Miranda shows herself popular with Sweetrobin, kind of playing a role there. She's tells Sweetrobin how handsome he looks. I wonder what her angle is there. She's just winning favor with the top guy. That makes sense. But she's unmarried, and while the age range is pretty big there, she's 21, so it wouldn't be out of the question for her to marry Sweetrobin herself. She might be thinking that in the back of her head as a possibility. I don't know, but it's worth considering. She does give us a trove of things to think about beyond theories like that. She mentions Simon Templeton and Lady Waynwood and how they've been won over by Littlefinger. As per his prediction, we kind of went over that at the time. When he predicted it, we followed through and said, yes, he's going to win them over. Riverrun is yielded, we learn, and Dragonstone and Storm's End remain, which is interesting about chapter sequencing because Dragonstone has fallen by this time. So either the news has been concealed or it just hasn't arrived yet. They just haven't heard yet. I think that's more likely. But it does give some people ammo for the whole, Dragonstone hasn't really fallen theory, which personally I'm not very big on. But I haven't closed the door on it, so there's always a chance. Now, I think what was happening with Marillion, Randa brings up Marillion maybe as in hopes that Sansa will say something she shouldn't. Doesn't bite on that, but she's smart enough to keep that under wraps. We know Marillion didn't really kill Lysa, and that story probably sounded weird to a lot of people, to a lot of clever people, especially, and Miranda is a clever person. Sure, she may be wondering about that, was maybe trying to get something out of Sansa, but no bites on that hook. However, she got a major bite when she brings up some bastard son of Eddard Stark, and Sansa literally blurted out, Jon Snow, it says, blurted out, and surprised. Yeah, so why...
I just want to say that I want Sansa to have like an answer ready and for Miranda to ask her and for Sansa to be like, yeah, he's one of the most famous bastards in the realm. All of us bastards look up to him.
You would know, being a highborn, what we bastards think about. It's because that would have been a great response to Miranda saying, you're prettier than me, but my breasts are bigger. And, it's like, I'm not worried about those breasts. They're not, because they're bastard breasts or whatever she says. It's like, yeah, well, we bastards have our own language too, actually. She could have really leaned into this whole bastard culture thing. Just making it all up. Like, Miranda doesn't know any better. We
disavow Ramsay Snow. Now that he's a Bolton.
So, Nina spells it out really well here. Why would Littlefinger's bastard, supposedly raised in a Gulltown mother house to be a septa, have any idea of the name of Eddard Stark's bastard son, who he never talks about? Like, Eddard doesn't exactly go parading Jon Snow around. I mean, they put him in the back at the feast for God's sake. So she wouldn't know anything about this person, but Sansa Stark would. And you know that, okay, think about how easy it is not to know for sure that Alayne is Sansa, but let's say you're an aware noble thinking about the Game of Thrones, thinking about this and that, thinking about politics, and you know Sansa escaped from King's Landing. You know she's going to go if she hasn't gone with Tyrion overseas or wherever he is, she's going to pop up with one of the great houses. There's only so many places she can pop up. It's almost a process of elimination. She's like, well, she's not going to go to the Iron Islands. She's not going to go to, she's not likely to go to the Dorne or something like that. She's not likely to go to, say, Storm's End. Like, right? Why would she be at Storm's End?
She can't be back in the north.
Yeah, she's not back in the north. Like,
so
there's plenty.
You're like, well, she could be in the Reed. She could be in the Riverlands. She's not going to be in the Westerlands.
Right. Anyone who sits down to think about it can narrow it down pretty well.
Because she has 3 regions.
Yeah, so she can suspect very clearly. It's like, okay, so Littlefinger all of a sudden has a daughter that no one knew about. and she's pretty, and everyone says Sansa's pretty. The age is about the right thing. The hair color's different, but that's not the biggest. That's obviously changeable. So this is why I think the Marillion thing was was a fishing attempt. It just didn't work. Because this fishing attempt did work, and she just randomly brings up Eddard Stark's bastard. Like, that was clearly, she knew what she was doing. And this is really good. This is really clever subtext, really good dialogue, excellently done by George, in my opinion. And Randa shows her skills, doesn't fixate, doesn't let Sansa realize she's made this mistake. She lets it pass. She's like, I don't want Sansa to realize she spilled the beans. So she doesn't say anything more. She just keeps going and talks about the next subject, bringing up Harry the Heir, all that. All these details about him we're not going to talk about Harry too much right now because we're going to see him on screen when we get to The Wind's a Winner, and that just makes more sense to talk about him when we've got him front and center. But Miranda Royce, again, really clever. It's really neat how she comes off and what's really going on. You see the cleverness when you unpack it, but she comes off like Littlefinger said. She comes off as gossipy, but she's quite clever and observant. Yep, it's exactly what he said. Very cool. Talk about setup for that same TWOW chapter with Sansa, where we'll have some more of Randa and some other characters. Lots of things being set up for that. For one thing, it sets up these new protectors of Robert Arryn. We'll talk about that more at the time, but it's going to be interesting to see how these protectors react to their king or their lord dying of poison, I guess. Will they blame themselves? Will they? Well, I don't know. But more in lines of Sansa, Littlefinger hires 3 men. Says, he's hiring more hedge knights or what have you. Sir Byron, Sir Morgoth, and Sir Shadrick the Mad Mouse. Ooh, look at that. Again, this is when we were like lamenting that Brienne didn't hang out with this guy, even though he was shady. He ended up in the right place.
Was that pun intended?
Yes, because he is from Shady Glen.
Yes.
Yeah, that was intended.
Shady, Shadrick, Shady Glen, yeah.
He's shady rich, shad rich. Yeah, shade rich. That's how you pronounce it. And it's pretty clever. Like, first-time readers might catch that because the name is very clearly stated, Sir Shadrick. It's not like the description of him where you're like, isn't that the same guy? The name is clearly stated, but still that's easy to miss because there's just a billion characters. And if you don't catch this till reread, I don't blame you. But Sir Shadrick narrowing down the kingdoms, probably why he came to the Vale. Decent chance he was able to figure it out, or at least thought it through. Like a lot of people, is like, well, if you're Sansa, wouldn't you go to the Vale where your aunt is? Well, yes, she's dead now, but she wasn't dead when that decision would have been made, right? Lysa was alive when the Purple Wedding happened, is my point. So what's he going to do? He's found her. Is he going to kidnap her and run off and deliver her to Cersei? Probably not. But it's a reminder that Littlefinger can't be perfect. He's allowed an element into his household that is a big threat. And, well, there's another threat perceived in that chapter. It was Alayne's TWOW chapter is going to be really fun for us to get to, even though it won't be for a little while, because not only is there the threat of Sir Shadrich, Sir Shadrich, but there's the threat of the mountain clans. Like, they've been kind of hanging on the wall as an option to do dangerous things ever since they've been brought up and shown how dangerous travel is. And the Chekhov's Klansman bit is grown in importance because they've returned to the Vale since the wars, heavily armed by Tyrion. They have, 3,000 helmets and axes and swords. That's a lot of equipment. They are now way more dangerous. So there's a lot of ways this could go. And we've hardly scratched the surface on that. So if Sir Shadrich is going to try to steal Sansa, he needs to be aware that there's some other dangers. And just how will he get out of the Vale with her is kind of the question. If he does steal her, like, escaping this region is no small feat. The famous 5-year gap /3 queens quote. Let's read that one.
You would not believe half of what is happening in King's Landing, sweetling. Cersei stumbles from one idiocy to the next, helped along by her council of the deaf, the dim, and the blind. I always anticipated that she would beggar the realm and destroy herself, but I never expected she would do it quite so fast. It is quite vexing. I had hoped to have 4 or 5 quiet years to plant some seeds and allow some fruits to ripen, but now it is a good thing that I thrive on chaos. What little peace and order the 5 kings left us will not long survive the 3 queens, I fear.
So 4 or 5 quiet years, that's certainly a reference to the 5-year gap, most likely, kind of a tongue-in-cheek. Yeah, he's like, George was expecting you to have that too, Littlefinger, but your plans changed. But he says, good thing he thrives on chaos.
Also, Littlefinger beggared the realm.
Yeah, right?
Before
Like, how is
Cersei.
he... What a hypocrite, right?
He left me here.
Where are all these massive bribes that he's giving people come from? Yeah, from all his prior financial chicanery. Yes, indeed. I mean, he is good at turning a profit as well, but he also cheats. So he's like all the skills, the unethical and the ethical. So who are the 3 queens? Marjorie and Cersei seem like locks. Probably not Sansa, but although we could see her becoming a queen later, he's certainly not talking about her now, I don't think. Arianne or Myrcella. Daenerys is certainly more likely. Nina's pretty certain it's Marjorie, Cersei, Daenerys. It seems hard for Littlefinger to not be aware of Dany. To be fully aware, no, I don't think so. But to be aware she exists at all, I mean, the guy has got a network of informers. He prides himself on being aware of what's happening in a variety of places. He's probably not as well connected overseas as Varys. Well, definitely not as well connected as Varys overseas. But Dany's not hidden. She conquered the Slaver's Bay. That news might take a little while to reach Westeros, but heck, the Cinnamon Wind brought news of her dragons. So, I mean, people know about her. I mean, okay, think of it this way. At the beginning of this book, dudes with no political clout whatsoever, who aren't even maesters, just guys who were low-level Citadel dudes, have heard about Daenerys. So I think Littlefinger knows about Daenerys. If those guys know, he knows, right? But again, it comes back down to what level of knowledge does he have? However, if he's thinking of her as a queen, he must have a pretty solid level of knowledge about her. Have some understanding of what she's capable of, some understanding of her power and forces and ambition. Certainly would be aware of the dragons, and would also be aware, like everyone else, that the dragons are not dangerous yet, but they most certainly will be when they are adults, or at least not little hatchlings. And of course, the Vale contains one of the 5 true cities in Westeros. There is Lannisport in the west, Old Town in the Reach, White Harbor in the north, King's Landing in the Crown Lands, and Gulltown in the Vale. Cities get news first, because that's where the ships come, and they bring that news with them. So that's, yeah. So the idea that Littlefinger is partly ignorant of Dany, sure, but completely ignorant, I don't think so. So I do think those are the best options for the 3 queens. There are other possibilities. He could be referring to the Queen of Thorns, but that still would just be Marjorie. He's still referring to the Tyrell faction, whether he means specifically Marjorie or Olenna. So I think those are basically the same person as far as this exercise goes. And of course, he has to be referring to Cersei as one of them. So yeah, I do think Dany is very likely. All right, moving on. We get more examples of Littlefinger's overwhelming bribery and how he just wins people through sheer financial might. This is what happens with Lord Corbray's marriage. We hear about that. We hear about him marrying a merchant's daughter, which is rarely done. And it's, quote, a staggering dowry, which they say it had to be because she's lowborn. So this is it. Everyone has a price. The nobility has a price to marry to the commoners. It just is a staggering one. But it does exist. That is basically the theory Littlefinger operates, that everyone has a price. Sometimes the price is staggering, but it does exist. and his wealth is staggering, so he can pay that. And it gets him things he needs, which, in parts of which, is the ability to rebuild that staggering wealth to make more staggering bribes with. Poisoned gifts, indeed, very much like so many of these other ones. So, this continues. We talked about how he suborned Anya Waynwood, or would do it. Now we see that it's happened. Same thing. He bought up her house's debts. The Waynwood debts were out there. They owed money for a variety of things. He took those debts on and is like, well, hey, I'll cancel those debts for you if you do what if I want. So again, huge amounts, most likely, but that's what it takes. Huge amounts are what it takes to basically buy the heir to the Vale away from her. She had possession of the heir to the Vale, and he wanted it. And, well, she set a high price, and he met it. And this is really undoing all of Ron Joyce's plans. Joyce?
Yeah, Joyce.
I said Joyce. Bronze Jan Royce. Because he's like figured that he could get the rest of the Vale Lords on his side. They needed some time to undermine Littlefinger, but the opposite's happening. The people he thought would see it his way and maybe work with him to try to undermine Littlefinger, they're all being bought and turning against him. I mean, not violently, at least not yet. But as we'll also see in the Winds of Winter chapter, he's going to be giving them financial advice. So he's going to empower the other Vale Lords to make money, while guys like Bronze Jan Royce will not be getting this advice, which is going to be, I think, good advice. So he's empowering his enemies with good financial advice, while his enemies will be left out of those discussions. And thus the gap between the power in these houses will grow, as houses like Runestone will wane a little bit in power, as other houses form alliances and gain in wealth, benefiting from Littlefinger's cynical rule, while those who stand on principles like honor will lose, probably, because they're faced with an enemy that operates outside the lines, just like Euron in the Iron Islands, just like kind of like Cersei, with less skill in her case, but very similar type of situation all around. Okay. What have I neglected to mention? The description of Dennis Arryn, Nina writes, closely resembles Littlefinger's earlier account of Harry Harding, the handsome and gallant knights from dynastically unimpressive backgrounds. Harry's the son of a vassal of vassal House Harding. Dennis and Arryn of a poor, proud branch, so a cadet branch, both with not literally magic ties, but distant ties that happened to work out because of all the other branches in between died out. And he's really testing Sansa on her understanding of these dynastic situations, and she does really quite well. Sansa's quick pronouncement of Harry's high place in the Arryn succession reflects credit on her. We readers have a lot more information going into this conversation. We have been told about a lot of these characters ahead of time. For Sansa to piece it together that way is of small note, but notable for sure. And it's another example of her rising sense of observancy and understanding of dynasty, family trees, things like that, which is obviously very important in her world. Extremely important in Littlefinger's world too, so it's another thing he's kind of passing on and making sure she's aware of the importance of that. She learns these things. She had originally learned these things out of politeness. It's polite to learn these things to be able to speak to them in court and be able to say the right things. Not for intrigue, but they have that value too, as she's quickly learning. So Joe did a little bit of quick research on the dichotomy, Sansa Alayne dichotomy. 10 times in this chapter compared to 3 previously. So this is a huge chapter. Only 2 of the 10 are Sansa referring to herself internally. One of them is this time around is when she's thinking that she knows what a wolf sounds like. Meaning 10 times she thinks of herself as Sansa, that is, not Alayne. So she's more thinking of herself that way, but still it's a big chapter. So as we said, there's some angles to this where she's very much maintaining her identity, and others where she seems to be very much going along with Littlefinger's version of reality. But mostly it's it's good because she's going along kind of things she has to and staying herself on things that matter the most, like her identifying the wolf and thinking of ghost wolf sounds and that thinking of her heritage that way and not being cold, things like that. So those are the core elements of her personality that are remaining in place. You covered this chapter on Girls Gone Canon, huh?
Yeah, I just wanted to shout that out and say that if you want to hear a bunch of my thoughts on it, you can, and theirs, you can go listen to that. I think of this as a very, very funny chapter. Sansa is a pretty good, funny character. She's got a lot of good lines, you know, like the beginning that we referenced, obviously, when they're talking about his chamber pot and how he threw it at someone, and she's like, "Oh, good. Got nothing to throw at me then." Little things like that.
Unintentionally sarcastic. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's good.
There's a few things like that I very much appreciate. So check that out.
That's great. Yeah, I remembered that you did that episode of Girls Gone Canon. For some reason, I thought it was a different Alayne chapter, so that's cool.
Yeah,
I'm
it was
glad
this
for the
one.
reminder.
Also, actually, one other thing I wanted to bring up that I enjoyed contemplating. Maya says that she could talk of great lords and knights who'd wet themselves on their way down. I wonder who that happened to.
Oh, yeah.
I'm picturing like Robert Baratheon. No, she didn't meet him, but you know.
Name names, yeah.
Name names. Come on, spill the tea.
Who peed themselves going down the mountain? That's a great,
great lords and bold knights.
She's got some serious gossip that no one else has. That's amazing. Very good. Yeah, I did not think of that. Well, there you go. There's several reasons to check out the episode with Shay on Girls Gone Canon, or just Girls Gone Canon in general. They've been coming up fairly often the last few weeks, and that's deservedly so. Okay. Super chat from Karen Sita. She says, half the people watching push the like button. Come on, rest of y'all. Yes, please. Actually, thank you for that. Saying that, Karen Sita. It surprisingly does matter quite a lot. That like button really helps the YouTube algorithms pick us up and suggest us to more people. So it is an act of support for sure. It is not meaningless. It really does make a difference. Ryan Ebarb sends a super chat, says, I don't really have any great thought or question. Just wanted to support you two. Love the streams. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that, Ryan. We feel the love, and we will keep them coming. Dornish Dame says, curious to see Sansa, Mia, and Robin interact together as the children of Ned, Robert, and Jon Arryn. Oh, great catch. That's true. That is the children of Ned, Robert, and Jon Arryn.
What a different dynamic, though, because, I mean, Jon Arryn's kid is the one being babied.
Yeah, it's the sucky one, yeah.
Is the child.
Yeah, it's weird that the 70-year-old guy had the young child and the 30-year-olds have the adult children. But yeah, I never thought about it that way. That's a great catch, Dornish Dame. Good one. Brandon Winslow says, thinking about it, if Robert was Dornish, he would have been a bit like Oberyn. Bastards all over the place and badass in their own right. Yeah, he would have taken more of an active role in raising them because it wouldn't have been taboo. That's a great point. Yeah, it also would have been less frowned upon.
And he had some good stock for his kids. I mean, strong.
Strong and big eyes and great hair, yeah.
Yeah, there would be some good bastards out there.
Yeah, there'd be just, instead of a bunch of widow's peaks like Oberyn left, there'd be more of these...
rippling
thick-shouldered,
yeah. Rippling muscles and all that, yeah.
There's a question here. Have people started figuring out who she is? Besides maybe Miranda Royce, there's a question. Maybe Anya Wainwood has done the same sort of piecing together that we just went through. She's a good candidate for that. I made this argument about how easy it is to, not easy, but how it could be narrowed down for people who are thinking about it, where Sansa is, precisely for this sort of question. Anya Wainwood may have figured it out. Simon Templeton, any other of these Veiled Lords, Bronzion Royce, now that he's had time to think about it, he didn't realize it in the moment when the Lord's Declarant scene happened, but after the fact, maybe he's pieced it together. We can't possibly know who, but it seems likely that there are multiple suspicions out there, and some of those people may have shared their suspicions with each other, and when two different people have the same suspicion and they air it together, they both feel like their suspicion is more likely to be true than it was. So the more whispering about this happens, the more likely it's going to be true. And I think Littlefinger realizes that. I think Littlefinger realizes that this whole thing is on a clock, because, yeah, people will eventually find out. A secret can't stay secret forever, so he's got to make those moves before it's too late. But that is how he likes to operate. Bryson Chung says, Miranda shows how talking constantly while revealing nothing can be just as effective as being secretive and elusive. Well, point. I haven't said that one in a while.
Good said.
Good said. That is really true. It's a reversal of the, like, say nothing and make them talk, make them reveal. Like, kind of like Tywin's method, sort of. And other people do the same thing, like sit there and be stony and taciturn.
Yeah,
and
I mean, if you
you'll make
just
them
chatter
uncomfortable.
away, you're looked at as being flighty, or
Yeah, they won't take you as seriously.
Yeah,
They'll let their guard down.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good take, Bryson. Dornish Dame says, Old Town has the story of Dany's dragons in Pate's prologue, so I would guess it has reached Goldtown. Yeah, I said the same thing. I would definitely agree with that. It seems it would be hard to believe that news of dragons hasn't at least hit the big cities. And it's probably gone in farther than that since it hit the prologue. Well, it was the prologue. That was a little while ago. Natalie Smith sends a super chat, says, glad to be able to listen live on a 10-hour drive. Much love and appreciation for y'all, and I sent this at a rest stop. Well, thank you very much for using your rest stop to do something generous like that. But
I'm
10
glad
hours.
we could, take over about 3 hours, 20 minutes of that.
Yeah, I hope you have other episodes of ours you haven't listened to. We've got plenty of them. But if not, re-listen or go check out Girls Gone Canon or something like that.
If you're into The Expanse, move on over to Here Be Dragons.
Yeah,
which has already
that's
started.
right.
We crossed over with them, but
Yeah, sorry, y'all. But we're almost done. Here's that line that we cited earlier. Archmaester Rennie drew our attention to it. It says, the wind was howling fiercely. It sounds like a wolf, thought Sansa. A ghost wolf, big as mountains. Yeah, saying ghost wolf doesn't not make you think of Ghost the wolf, does it? Especially associating it with mountains, like white, snowy mountains and all that. So just another reminder of who...
And the biggest mountains is significant because obviously direwolves.
Yeah.
She never says direwolf in there, but it's clear.
Yes, definitely. And the subtext here is really big because it says thought Sansa. It doesn't say thought Alayne. And Stefan B points out that when she thinks of Jane Poole, it's Alayne. Even Jane Poole didn't bring the name Sansa out in her mind, but thinking of this wolf business did. So that's a really interesting contrast, like what triggers thoughts of her real identity versus things that don't clear that bar, and she kind of maintains her assumed identity. Yeah. Paul Berry says, answers a question or seeks to suggest a possible answer to the question we asked as we started this chapter, which was, are we going to see the Eyrie again? He says, well, it feels like we're saying goodbye to it. I'm left with a question. For so much talk about the Eyrie being impregnable, what has that all been for? No one has ever tried. I wonder if protecting someone like Bran will be a thing in the Winds of Winter or a Dream of Spring, and if that person might go back to the Eyrie for that purpose. The TV show does give us a clue to that, sort of. Not a direct clue, but the fact that they did make Bran like bait and hide him in a certain place, and knowing that they were coming for him. Well, yeah. I mean, we certainly talked about it at the time on the TV shows. Like, if you're trying to protect Bran, I don't know if the Winterfell is the best place to be. But, yeah, the Eyrie might be. That's interesting. Very interesting. So if we do come back to the Eyrie, maybe it'll just be because the wars are over and it reopens, but it might be for some reason like this. It's used as a strategic location. As we've seen, there is an easy enough way to undermine that remote location, though, which was with a flying creature, meaning... well, what could that be other than a dragon? I don't really know what other flying creature we have to worry about in this sense. Obviously, there's other relevant flying creatures, but not ones that could be a threat to Bran in the Eyrie. A dragon is the sole answer to that question, I think, and we've seen it multiple times in history. We got Visenya taking the Lord of the Vale, who was Robert's age, on a little lap around the tower, which caused his mother to surrender after seeing that. And we have Maegor the Cruel breaking a siege there and throwing the bad guys out the moon door. And in return for them having done the same to the lawful Lord of the Eyrie when they took it over. So, There is certainly not only logical, theoretical reasons for the Eyrie to come back into the story, but there are historical examples that have not happened in current times, and sometimes that's reason to think they might. Because history does repeat itself often in A Song of Ice and Fire, though not precisely, not exactly, different versions. The seed of events. Last week, we covered 169 minutes and 8 seconds. This week, it was 199 minutes, 30 seconds. That is our longest batch of chapters that we covered in any stretch of A Feast for Crows. It isn't quite the longest episode we recorded on it because some things require more discussion. Some parts of these chapters didn't have a lot to say about.
Still a pretty long episode at 3 hours, 25 minutes.
I guess that's the second longest to Feast for Crows, Valar Rereadis. We had our longest of any Valar Rereadis episode a few weeks ago.
That one was 4 hours.
Yeah, that one was really long. We had to split it in half. So as for total progress, well, we've only got one more. This is 1,862 minutes out of 2,030 minutes, and we're 91.7% of the way through, so that tells you that we got 8.3% left, and we'll cover that next week.
The final week.
Yeah, so we mentioned a couple of episode types here. We talked about the Girls Gone Canon episode Shay was on, and their show in general. We have an episode on the 5-year gap.
Yeah, it was a panel discussion from Con of Thrones that has me, Joe Magician, Bookshelf Stud, and the lovely Joanna Lannister of Tumblr.
Yeah. Also, we have a chapter recap on both Ariane's, one of Ariane's spoiler chapters, no, both of them, as well as Sansa's TWOW chapter.
Of course, those were made well before, say, the show ended.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. So we're going to have to revisit those because we're going to have new takes on them. But before we get there, if you are curious at what our initial takes were, since a lot of them will still be similar, you can check those out now because we won't be getting to those until after Dance with Dragons. Speaking of, we'll be taking a few weeks off of Valar Rereadis before we start Dance with Dragons. And by off, I don't mean there won't be content. We just won't be doing Valar Rereadis. We'll be wrapping up some of our other projects that have lingered that I haven't been able to finish because I really need a few days in a row to finish them rather than just a day at a time per week. I need to really focus in to finish some of these projects. So we'll be doing that. So it won't be a non-content break, but it will be a Valar Rereadis break. So that'll be after week 12. And of course, we have the wrap-up episode before that as well. So next time, we've got, what do we have? Brienne 8, the one with sword or noose, a.k.a. the gang hangs the gang.
Cersei 10, help me, Jaime Lannister, you're my only hope, a.k.a. the sparrow traps the lion.
Jaime 7, Golden Hand the just say no to Cersei, a.k.a. the one where Blackfish escapes, Brotherhood infiltrates.
And finally, Sam 5, the gang meets Marwyn the Mage, a.k.a. Pate is dead, long live Pate.
And that is the last chapter in all the book. There is no epilogue, so we'll be having a lot of fun with that. Those 4 chapters are awesome. They set up so much. It'll probably be on the longer side as far as episodes, because anytime we have to theorize, that really opens up the discussion and adds some time to it all, but that's part of the fun. Oh, look at that. Natalie Smith, last second super chat says, question for everyone, what History of Westeros content should I listen to next? Go.
So everyone in the chat, tell Natalie what you think they should listen to.
Yeah, so that question wasn't actually directed at us, so I won't answer it. So we'll have to report. Maybe we'll report back next time with what the answer to this question was.
Yeah.
But for now, it's been a while. This is a long episode, so we shall say goodbye. Until next time, you know what to do. Valar Rereadis.